Live sound check number 1, presenter's laptop. Live sound check number 1, clerk's laptop.
Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. I would like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public, be advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals and the media may also be audible and visually recording this message. All electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. I will do now a roll call. Councillor Clark.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Jackson.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Marula will not be attending today. He has other meetings. Councillor Nan.
Good morning, present. Thank you.
And Councillor Whitehead.
Top of the morning, tell you.
Thank you. Okay, approval of the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair, there are several changes to the agenda. We have one new communication item, item 4.3 is correspondence from Oleg Semkov respecting building a recreation park. The recommendation is to be received. We have two delegations requests, items 5.1 and 5.2. 5.1 is from Robert Manley respecting Wesley, conflict of interest and supporting criminal activity. We also have item 5.2 from Medora Upel and Graham Cubitt from Hamilton is Home respecting endorsement of the Hamilton is Home initiative, and both are for today's meeting. We have two new consent items. Item 6.1 is reopening the child care and early years systems. Report number HSC 20027A citywide. And item 6.2, temporary emergency benefit for persons on Ontario Works and Ontario Disability Support Program to assist with COVID-19 related expenses. HSC 20033 citywide. And then we have item 9.4, new discussion item, municipal indigenous relationship building related to city initiative, archaeology and natural heritage assessments, HSC 20030 citywide. And in addition, a handout for item 5.1 and the presentation for item 8.1 have also been published with the agenda.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda? Councillor Whitehead and Councillor Nan. Thank you. Is there any discussion on the, first we'll take a vote.
Go ahead. Discussion. If you want.
First of all, is there any discussion to the agenda as amended? I see none, and we'll go to a vote, and it will come up shortly. And there it is, so vote accordingly. Okay. Thank you. We will require an electronic representative vote. Okay. The motion is carried, and thank you. Declaration of interest. Are there any declaration of interest? I see none. Let's move on. Approval of the minutes, previous meetings. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes of July 13, 2020? Councillor Jackson and Councillor Clark. Is there any discussion on approval of the minutes? I see none. We will require an electronic vote. Please indicate your vote now. It will come up. It will come up shortly. There it is. Thank you, clerk. And the motion was carried. Thank you. Communication item 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve correspondence for 1A through E, for 2A to G, as 4.3 as recommended. Councillor Nan and Councillor Jackson. Is there any discussion on any of the communication items? I see none. Oh, Councillor Clark, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have one question. I noticed under a number of the communications, when I go to the right-hand part of my screen, it indicates that the attachments that were received were redacted. What was redacted from the communications from citizens?
Clerk?
The redacted information was just their email addresses and any personal information. Sometimes they put their specific addresses, but it was just personal information that didn't need to be broadcast to the public, Councillor.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And thank you for that explanation. Okay, we will require an electronic vote. Please Councillor Nan.
Thank you. Through the chair, I just wanted to speak to item 4.1 and the group of correspondences related to the temporary shelter opening at 378 Main Street East. So first of all, thank you to the residents who are writing in to express their concerns. Last Tuesday, my office had the privilege of hosting a community information center with housing services, both here at the City of Hamilton, but also Good Shepherd, to talk about the temporary shelter that is opening at the former Cathedral Boys School location. And out of respect for my residents and a commitment to transparency and anticipating the trepidations that residents may have around safety stemming from previous experiences or misconceptions or myths about shelter operations, as well as wanting to ensure that we provided a forum for genuine feedback and input for improvement in safety prior to the operations beginning, we had a pretty robust meeting. We had over 45 individuals joining us virtually and many correspondences leading up to that and after the fact as well. So it was important for us to have hosted this meeting. We had the opportunity to respond to questions directly. We had over 70 questions identified prior to the meeting, and many of them were repeat questions, so my office helped make sure that each of those correspondences were responded to. We also video recorded the community information session and made it available through all of the social media platforms on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Twitter, as well as a summary report from all of the questions that were asked inside the meeting as well. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank the residents who participated. I think it's critical to ask tough questions. I think it's understandable that residents had a high expectation of consultation prior to the decision being made, but I did want to articulate and make it very clear for the public record that this decision is made inside of a pandemic and was part of the Emergency Operations Center. And so as we are seeing the closure and folding down of operations at First Ontario Centre, we also are very clear that we still require the same number of beds in our shelter system that was already strained prior to COVID-19. And it is our duty and obligation, I think our moral authority as a government, to ensure that the beds are available for those who are experiencing the most marginalized experiences of homelessness in our community right now. I also wanted to say thank you to all of the residents that expressed their support, offered the volunteering for the operations, and making it very clear that residents in a shelter are also our neighbors, and we all have a duty, I think, in these COVID times to extend our compassion to one another and make sure that we are being good neighbors with each other. So I'm pleased with the response that we got and the commitment by Good Shepherd as a neighbor operator of the shelter to come into place in September and the ways in which they were being nimble and responsive to residents' concerns. So I just wanted to say this is the right thing for us to do at this time for all of our residents across the city to remember that we are still facing this pandemic, and that those of us who are fortunate to be housed and to be able to stay physically distanced, for us to remember that we have a role to play, a collective role to play to uplift and ensure the safety and dignity of those who don't have. So thank you for the opportunity. And again, I do appreciate the residents who are expressing their concerns, and will continue working with you directly on dealing with the compounding challenges that the ward faces in terms of the co-location and what seems to many as being an excessive amount of residential care facilities and shelter services. So we'll continue. It's not something that we're going to solve in this little time frame. It's an ongoing structural issue and systemic issue and a system-wide housing issue as well. So thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Councillor Nan. We have Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you. And I did receive some calls from residents that live in Nan's area concerned about that. So I wanted to go on record and say this temporary shelter is a need that has to move forward on because of First Ontario coming out of operation. But I don't think I heard in the conversation, as my understanding, because I looked into it further, this is a temporary shelter to meet the needs during this COVID period. So I want to get that clarified because that wasn't clarified in the Narinder's comments just that took place. And I think the other issue that I want to raise, unlike First Ontario, and yes, neighbors go, that rubs both ways. So what protections or what activity is going to take place to curtail what happens outside the shelter? So what commitments are made, and how are you going to deal with those issues, unlike First Ontario Place?
You asking the question to?
Yeah, I don't know. I just think we need to make this and put this as public record because those are the key questions that were asked of me.
So Councillor Nan or Paul Johnson, or okay, Councillor Nan.
If I can, and I'd be more than happy to have staff respond as well. Councillor Whitehead, thanks for the comment. It was addressed in our community information session. The Good Shepherd operations team has a very robust plan in place. I'd be more than happy to share with you also the Q&A and summary of notes that we prepared after the meeting and that's circulated right now. It does address specifically fencing. It addresses outdoor access to space, and it also addresses the security issues and concerns about tenting outside of the facility as well. And Good Shepherd has made a commitment that that won't be happening. So
perfect.
If staff want to add more comments, do so.
Just wondering if Paul Johnson would like to comment on it, or?
Through the chair, no, that's a great summary, and I know that there were detailed notes taken, and those are publicly available. So I think I just want to thank our staff for getting involved as well and making sure that working with a provider of shelter services that does know what they're doing, and then the second piece is working with the councillor's office. We understand. I'll speak from an EOC perspective that some of these decisions we are taking without the usual course of conversation with both yourselves and the community, but has been noted here, A, this is temporary, and B, it is done under the fact that we're still in a state of local emergency when it comes to this pandemic.
Thank you. Thank you all.
So I saw the floor. So Paul, could I get clarification? The province lifted the state of emergency for the province of Ontario. Is that correct?
Through the chair, they lifted that and replaced it with some legislation which allows certain emergency orders to continue in the province, yes.
So we're still under emergency, yet the province is not?
Correct, as are, through the chair, most municipalities. And in fact, in one case, we must remain in that state of local emergency if we want to have the authority to redeploy staff to positions that they would not normally hold. So right now, we continue to review our local state of emergency and bring forward a recommendation when we feel it's right. But at this point, we remain in it.
So at some point, I look forward to a report that identifies the metrics in which justifies being under emergency when the province of Ontario is not. general public don't understand that philosophy. And when you make unilateral decisions under that, as you said, that auspices, and yet, our rates of infection has dropped dramatically. Something's not jiving in the context of the province lifting, and yet the municipality still has it in play, even though our numbers are better than the province overall. So I'm trying to understand what the metrics is. I'm not saying it's a good thing or bad thing, but people need to understand why we're still under emergency declaration.
And through the chair, we can certainly bring that information. You'll recall that Hamilton actually was one of the last to actually declare a state of local emergency for exactly some of the reasons you point out. We didn't need to. Much of what we have is under the policies you've passed in terms of our emergency management piece. What did change was the province required that municipalities declare a local state of emergency if they wish to have some of the ability to redeploy staff. We need that, and we have, as you've heard many times at committee meetings, been using that in order to bolster our approaches, particularly in public health, but also to the vulnerable sector. All of our food delivery and things like that is being done by people who don't normally do that. And we want to maintain those as long as the province allows us the flexibility to do that. We think it's an important tool to have. But I also want to say that we haven't done that without good, strong support from our union. So it's been a shared responsibility, but one we need to stay in. And we'll be reporting more in as we get into September around what we see as the future of some of these actions that we've taken as a city during the emergency.
Thank you for putting that as a matter of public record and providing that clarification. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. We're going to move on to 4.3, correspondence from Oleg Semkov, respecting building a recreational park. May I have a mover and a second? Oh, we're going to approve them all at the same time. Okay, 4.3. All right. May I have a mover and a second to approve correspondence 4.1, 4.2, 4.3 as recommended? Is there any discussion or any communications items? I see none. We will require electronic vote. Please indicate your vote now, and it will come up shortly. That was quick. The seconder would be Councillor Jackson and Councillor Whitehead and Councillor Jackson. All right. We'll move on. Delegation requested. Robert Manley, Wesley conflict of interest and supporting criminal activity for today's meeting. 5.2, Medora U-Paul and Graham Cubitt, Hamilton is home, respecting endorsement of the Hamilton is Home initiative for today's meeting. May I please have a mover and a seconder for the request 5.1 and 5.2 today's meeting? Councillor Whitehead and Councillor Clark. Yes. Yeah, he's there. Councillor Whitehead? Is there any discussion or any delegation requests? I see none. We will require an electronic vote. Please indicate your vote. And here it is. That was quick. Thank you, Clerk. And it was carried. Thank you. Consent items 6162. May I please have a mover and a second to receive consent items 61 and 62 as presented? Councillor Jackson, Councillor Nan. Is there any discussion on any of the consent items? I don't see none. We will require electronic vote. Please indicate your vote now. And Councillor Jackson, a thumbs up? Thumbs up. Thank you. And it's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, written or oral delegation, item 7. We are now turning to the delegations. We will vote to receive them after we have heard both delegations. Committee members are required that in order to request to speak on items, you must click on the delegate's name under item 5 on the agenda in eScribe. 5.1, I would like to call upon Robert Manley to delegate respecting Wesley, conflict of interest and supporting criminal activity. Robert, please turn on your camera. The clerk will unmute your microphone and you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Is my camera on now?
I don't see your camera. Yes, now I see it.
Okay. First of all,
Thank
I'd like to thank Terry Whitehead. As I'm hoping to demonstrate, security is essential on these shelters. Salvation Army and Good Shepherd do a great job. The Wesley takes no action at all. Just a few months ago, there was a gentleman standing outside waving cleavers around on ropes right out front their door for like 2 or 3 hours. I was hoping to address homelessness on Ferguson and thought that I was going to be addressing the conflict of interest at a later date, but I'm sure I can try and squeeze them both in. So anyway, the homelessness on Ferguson, this has created a heavy burden on the neighborhood. The Ferguson neighborhood was already unsafe due to criminal activities and trespassers from the Wesley Center. Granting extensions is exactly the same as granting a permit for publicly exhibited criminal behavior. Our neighborhood deserves a break. Here's a small list of problems we are forced to tolerate. Some deliveries refused. Some friends and family won't visit. Trespassers make it unsafe to sit outside our own building. I am streetwise, but many tenants are terrified to go outside. Litter and public defecation. Tim Hortons A&W are drive-through only as they won't open their doors. The blatant use of all forms of drugs. Needles are being found out back in the children's play area. I'm having to witness overdoses and sometimes death. Ambulances, fire trucks, police sirens all night. I am not heartless. They were screaming for help the other night, so I threw Narcan over my balcony and called 911, probably saving a life. But it's enough. The Ferguson neighborhood has to stop being the city's dumping ground for legalized criminal activities. So I really hope the extensions stop. And I will try to quickly address the Wesley. The Wesley does not have any security whatsoever. And where the conflict of interest comes in is they were to be, the tenants of my building were promised that the Wesley would be rid of. And then they got a 3-month extension. And now they're getting assessed every 3 months. The people at the Wesley, all the groups there, are the people that pay Wesley Homes, the people that manage my building. So they claim that they're assessing themselves every 3 months. There's no tenant representation at all when they're being paid to manage this building. And even if the Wesley doesn't close, there must be a demand for outside security for the safety of the neighborhood. It is very ridiculous, the activity that goes on. If I phone the police to report criminal activity, the police tell me to tell my landlord. I tell my landlord, the landlord says, call the police. The tenants in this neighborhood have absolutely no no support. That's how almost every single person in my building feels. That we're just being washed aside with the rights of criminals outweighing those of rent-paying, law-abiding citizens. Thank you for your attention. And one last quick thing. I did present to the city before on the problem with rent geared to income. Terry Whitehead was there. I'd like to thank people. I did eventually get that rent geared to income. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. We're going to, is there any question for Robert? Yes, there is. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, at what point did the tenants get consulted about the activities at the encampments outside?
We've had no, to my knowledge, we've had no communications at all about it. To my knowledge, I may miss the odd note posted on my door, but to my knowledge, we have received. We told at one, or we were told at one point they'd be gone like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and then we were told they got an extension. That's the communication we've had.
Thank you, Robert. I wrote a column in the paper. Did you see it?
No.
So basically, the primary essence of it is that when these things happen, the first thing we need to be doing is consulting the impacted community. Would you agree with that principle?
Yes, it should.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions for Robert? I see none. We'll move on to 5.2. Medora Uppal and Graham Cubitt Hamilton is Home respecting endorsement of the Hamilton is Home initiative. I would like to call upon Medora Uppal and Graham Cubitt Hamilton is Home to delegate respecting endorsement of the Hamilton is Home initiative. Medora and Graham, please turn on your camera. The clerk will unmute your microphone, and you have 5 minutes each. Thank you.
Thank you to the committee for taking the time to hear us today, and thank you to the clerks for getting us up online. Graham Cubitt from Indwell and I, Medora Uppal from YWCA, will be presenting on behalf of the collective. Graham's just getting the slides up. Great. Okay. So Hamilton is Home is an affordable housing collective with the unprecedented goal of building 3,000 homes in 3 years. We know an inclusive community needs equitable access to high quality, safe, and affordable housing. We are committed to working together to make these new developments reflect Hamilton's diversity. True affordability, accessibility, and energy efficiency defines this housing portfolio. Collectively, we have the expertise, track record, and sites to get started now and follow through. With support from our community, local MPs, MPPs, and City Council, we together can align each investment to achieve greater strategic impacts. Most of the funding is already available through the National Housing Strategy. There's definitely potential for provincial dollars for support services, and we know new money is forthcoming in response to the pandemic. Next slide, Graham. The collective was launched by 7 active affordable housing developers in the city of Hamilton. So this includes Kiwanis, Victoria Park, Indwell, Sacagawea, Good Shepherd, City Housing Hamilton, and YWCA Hamilton. Since that time, we've expanded with 4 additional housing providers, and we keep adding more to the list as we go. We also have support by 8 community service organizations formally, and that number is growing. And please keep in mind that as we've started and we continue to grow, we're open to new groups who are interested in talking to us and joining the collective. Next slide, Graham. We believe we've created excitement and hope for the possibility of making a deep impact in addressing Hamilton's housing crisis. In part because others understand our expertise across the housing spectrum, as shown here. From working with people who are homeless to building affordable housing, all the way to the other end of the spectrum of market home ownership. And the numbers you see up on your screen representing how many homes we support is actually an underrepresentation where we're increasing those numbers as we move along and assess each agency's contribution. Next slide. So to date, we've identified together over 50 sites to build affordable housing on. We own those sites or we can secure those sites very quickly. Next slide. Hamilton is Home is focused on key issues of financial and social returns. So what we'd like to do is address the city's housing wait list. We know that we need a large-scale plan as a city to make a dent in the list of over 6,000. As social services and housing providers, we actually understand the needs of those who make up the wait list. We support them every day. This includes women and children fleeing violence, people with disabilities, and people who've had a long history of poverty and housing precarity. We'd also like to strengthen the link between health and housing. Solutions that are needed here are not just the responsibility of one level of government or one sector. Members of our coalition have been working for years with the health sector and the province to provide meaningful supports to create successful housing solutions for people who are chronically homeless. This collective intends to build on those supports and relationships. We are also interested in economic recovery, and particularly economic recovery that uses an equity lens. Prior to COVID, some of us spoke about the structural inequities that contributed to placing some members of our communities at greater risk than others. COVID-19 has not only illuminated those risks, it has pushed people on the edge of housing precarity and poverty into the abyss, demonstrating for all of us that the health of our entire community is at risk when some of us are excluded or forgotten. Indigenous people, women, people with disabilities, Black and Brown people, LGBTQ community members, and immigrants need to be front and center of any successful recovery plan if we intend it to be sustainable, meaningful, and make a deep impact. Otherwise, next time our city will lose the battle in the next pandemic or environmental crisis. And lastly, we'd like to achieve the co-benefits listed in the Climate Action Plan. Our projects offer construction of high-performing buildings, which is an opportunity to increase quality and paying jobs, while also saving money on energy prices through either building energy retrofits or energy-efficient new construction. This is demonstrated in our passive house designs and other green energy solutions we have to date. And the last slide. Since the Coalition's first public presentation in March, we've been continuing discussions with Minister Tassi, reaching out to other potential partners, including the Hamilton Community Foundation, and we are working with CMHC to streamline an application review process for Hamilton is Home. In working with the city on this initiative, we want to confirm that the Coalition's goals and objectives align with the city's interests. We want to secure city support for the Coalition's federal and provincial funding requests to build affordable housing, and we want to establish a strategy and practical solutions for the Coalition and the city to collectively address the affordable housing crisis. So now I'd like to turn it over to Graham to answer questions and just add any more information that I may have missed.
Thank you, Medora. We will see if there's any questions. Yes, there are a few. Okay, Councillor Clark first.
Good morning, Madam
That's
Chair.
our question.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Super, sorry. I have to check because every so often I shut myself off accidentally. The question that I have is, I understand the 1.1 billion request to the federal government. Is that a shared cost with the province? We're used to these 50-50, a third. Is there an expectation that we have to get the province on side also, as well as the federal government?
Through you, Madam Chair, Councillor Clark, that's a very good question, because the programs have been changing dramatically over the last few years. We're familiar with the Investment in Affordable Housing program and the subsequent Social Infrastructure Fund program. Those were a specific cost-sharing relationship between the federal and provincial governments. The National Housing Strategy did change that, and it's more of a direct application to CMHC. We're mostly familiar with the co-investment stream, which is the one that the co-investor is typically the municipality, although the private sector is included. It's not a specific cost-sharing formula with the province, although 2 weeks ago we heard Minister Clark at a funding announcement describe the good relationship that's emerging between Ontario and the federal government in relation to the housing portfolio. And he described it, he said, well, I'm starting to call it the Canada-Ontario housing strategy. So there is a growing alignment between the federal and provincial government about ways to fund affordable housing, and particularly everyone's aware that the need for supportive housing is different than just straight market or straight rental housing, and so it requires a somewhat different funding formula. MP Adam Vaughan, who's a federal MP sort of representing CMHC around the country, has talked about a need for some new, partnerships, working relationships with the province in terms of addressing some of these issues. So that's the long answer to say there's not a specific formula, but it's a growing collaboration and working relationship between the federal and provincial governments around affordable housing investment.
Thank you. That cleared it up.
Maybe specifically in our proposal, the 1.1 the math is 1.125 billion because we multiplied 3,000 units by $375,000 per unit. Now that's a standardized rule of thumb number we came to agree on. Some one bedroom units will be less than that. We're currently building, I think it's around 323,000 for a one bedroom unit in Hamilton. In Mississauga, of course, prices are higher, but 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedroom units would be more expensive depending on size. So that's a standardized figure. It's around 80% of the cost would be, up to 80% of the cost would be requested from CMHC. Of that 80% of cost, though, maybe 70% would actually be financing from CMHC. So when you start drilling into the cost, the majority of the cost of this investment would be CMHC federal government financing, which is right now very low interest, maybe 1.5% or so. So it is a specific project by project formula for costs. And CMHC, when Medora and I have spoken to CMHC reps, they said they're looking at how to assess this whole portfolio on a global scale, while looking at the nuances of each individual site's housing project pro forma to make sure that each project is sustainable for each proponent organization.
I think I would add to that in terms of the provincial contribution beyond capital, we're talking about making sure that we have the supports that are needed for the particular people who continually face homelessness or housing precarity. So that's where I think the province, if it's not in capital contributions only, it will be in supportive housing solutions, right? Whether that's funded through Ministry of Health or MCCSS. There's a number of areas we could tap into to add those supports to the housing that actually would make them more successful than just thinking from a capital component.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the answer. And so when we're moving forward with our application as a collective, are we submitting an application that is 1.125 billion? Or are we submitting a dozen applications that would total up to 1.125 billion? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Through you, Madam Chair, it would be a series of specific applications based on each specific project with the global value of that 1.125 or so. CMHC is not looking at this as being one application, but it's more of a working relationship towards a global goal of this type of investment. You've probably heard that the way CMHC is working isn't the most streamlined. It is very complex and cumbersome. And so what we're saying is that by working together, we have a stronger voice to the senior leadership at CMHC that says, treat each of us fairly as individual organizations and treat us not as sort of a one-off project, but as the collective impact. Of course, you have to do due diligence based on, does this building and this pro forma make sense? But you have to look at the overall outcomes for the community. One of the benefits of doing that, though, as well, is to Medora's point, each program can reflect more of a niche constituency or a demographic or a problem that we're trying to solve as a community, rather than trying to lump all outcomes into every project. And whether it's demographics or priority populations or supports or accessibility, those can be nuanced based on each individual site, rather than trying to make 50 projects all have the same characteristics.
Councillor Clark, your time's up, but I want to give you more time because those are great questions. So if you have a few more, we'll go ahead.
And I really appreciate it, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the delegates giving us this comprehensive information because some of it we may not have heard before. And so my final question would be, in the application process, as these individual agencies are filing for these applications, is the city helping them with their applications? Is the city involved in vetting those applications to give us, the collective, if you will, Graham, the best foot forward? Almost a vetting process, if you will.
Through you, Chair Pauls. That's an important contribution that the city can actually make and would actually be considered part of the co-investment to CMHC. The ability to, we recognize that we're all different agencies with different expertise, capacities, but making sure that each of our applications comes before CMHC with the same level of rigor, with sort of an integratedness within the overall plans and outcomes that the city is shooting for. Having it reviewed by Housing Division or others within the city would be a key thing for CMHC's confidence in the proposal, but also knowing that it's meeting the Hamilton is Home brand or standard, so that they treat it the way we expect them to treat it, not just overlooking it as just one more application on somebody's desk.
And that vetting process, I would be suggesting, Graham, would be over and above the endorsement of the overall 1.125 billion.
Yes, we've had some very good conversations with the Housing Division, Edward John and team. Obviously, Paul Johnson, Jason Thorne is representing sort of planning and that side of things as well. We're all very aware that housing is a critical issue. It's one of this term of council's priorities. So everything that we would try to do for this Hamilton is Home proposal would integrate with and empower staff to actually achieve many of the outcomes. I know you're going to hear about the 5-year update on the housing and homelessness plan. How can we actually get to the end of that 10-year plan, not only achieving but exceeding many of the goals that are set in the plan? And the Housing Division particularly obviously would be a key point of contact and key channel for us to collectively work at integrating all of these housing projects towards the ultimate goals.
Thank you, sir. Madam Chair, I appreciate your generosity and latitude. I would like to ask some questions of staff if you can come back to me later on. Thank you.
I sure will. Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you. And thank you, Medora and Graham, for your presentation. Bold, absolutely. Working at the federal and provincial level, there's still what's called a geographic consideration. So how much money is in the pot? And then there's a consideration in regards to how it's distributed throughout the country, and then certainly in the province, how it's spread out throughout the province. Do you feel, understanding that that is the history of how the money is distributed, that would get in the way of, because $1.1 billion going to one community sounds like a lot of money, considering what is the total envelope for Ontario?
To you, Madam Chair. This is an important consideration, and I think one of the key things that we had to wrestle with when we came up with this idea. The investments have historically been per capita, but we have heard Parliamentary Secretary Vaughan a number of times say the National Housing Strategy is no longer per capita. It's based on good applications for viable projects. And I think the key thing the key opportunity we have as a city, and by coming together in this way, is that we actually can, I don't want to say subvert the normal, but in a sense, we no longer have to work within that per capita model as it's set up. If we submit good applications and other communities don't, we move up the line and we move towards letters of intent, et cetera, because we're putting together viable projects. It is, from a different angle, Hamilton, I believe, if I did the math correctly, is around 2% of Canada's population. This investment number, that sort of 800 million or so that we might be asking for, is around 2% of the National Housing Strategy budget. Now, that's the global budget. It's, I think, 50 billion. It's broken up into different streams. So, you know, it might be a little bit, the math might be a little bit off, but in terms of the global amounts of money, in terms of our global place within the Canadian population, it may align well there even. The key thing is deliverables, and the federal government has struggled to get money out the door, and being able to help them with that may be something that Hamilton could become good at.
I appreciate that. I think one of the concerns I have is we're not the only ones that are going to be submitting good applications. So, you know, we're not working in a vacuum here.
Oh.
And when I look at Oakville and Burlington and the underserviced challenges they have in regards to the growing needs in their community, it's no less important there than it is here in Hamilton. So I like the ambition, but I want to be a little more realistic because building false hope isn't I've always been a pragmatist in these things. I like reaching for the stars, but you know the problem is I've always wanted an NHL team, and people would say you're reaching for the stars. So be careful about the expectations. What do you say about that?
Chair Paul, through you. Go ahead, Medora. Sorry,
through the chair. I just want to address that in terms of when we're talking about the co-investment fund, it has some. Which is the largest, fund that can invest in terms of the grant dollars that are available, as well as the loan through the National Housing Strategy. It's specifically designed to address vulnerable populations and ensure that there's supports for some of the populations I identified and talked about. So women fleeing violence, people with disabilities, Indigenous people, and so on. And so it's not just a standard development of affordable housing, but they're really looking to target a particular audience. And I think that's where Hamilton, and in terms of this group, we come in with a unique proposition that's of interest to CMHC. And as Graham said, they've had challenges getting the money out. It's not, to be frank, I don't think every application has been a fit for the co-investment. And so they need some help, and Hamilton's in a position where we can help get that moving.
So the reason I raised the question, this is my last question, is that there is a need to distribute the financial burden on supporting new housing throughout municipalities across Ontario. Hamilton's regional center serves 2.5 million people, and disproportionately, I believe, other than Toronto, we are ending up, well, we know 80% of the population or growing is coming from the rural community into the larger cities. So the question is it best to have centers like Hamilton become a regional center for housing, or should we be working collaboration with our neighbors to ensure that there's some equity and distribution of housing, so that the pressure and that financial burden isn't all being on the back of Hamilton?
Through you, Chair Pauls. Yes, thank you. I think you've hit on one of the key opportunities, indeed, Councillor Whitehead. Hamilton. One of Hamilton's attributes, and sometimes we see this as a challenge, but we actually have a great great number of organizations. There's at least 10 of us who are coming together in this way, who are capable of actually developing. You mentioned Halton, you mentioned some of those other communities. They actually have very few organizations in those communities who are able or capable of developing affordable housing or supportive housing, which is a huge challenge to them, being able to actually access the National Housing Strategy on this level. The economic advantage, of course, to building in Hamilton versus building in Burlington is that the jobs and the construction are here. I think there are opportunities to work with, Halton Region and Burlington. They have, I heard recently, about $30 million in their housing reserve that they can't get spent because nobody puts in applications. Developers typically want to build more market-based product there because, well, you make more money. So I think there could be an interesting, conversation to work maybe at your level with councillors or leaders, civic leaders in some of those other communities to say, how might we even work together? But I'm not aware of a community that's done that. So that might be an interesting avenue to explore.
I appreciate that. Like I said, I think this is all our issue, and we all need to be part of the solution. And I don't think Hamilton alone can do it. I think we need to pull in other partnerships to take some of that weight and burden, because there's other ripple effects as you build this housing in the context of the community that then we have to clarify who's going to fund those issues. So I want to make sure that the burden isn't all on the backs of property taxpayers in the city of Hamilton on the long term.
I think one of the key things is that this large proposal isn't all just the lowest, housing for households with the lowest income. It's actually for across the spectrum of households. If you're making $18 an hour working in Hamilton nowadays, you struggle to find housing you can afford. And many of the apartments that would be built through this proposal would be by the Vic Parks, the Kiwanis, the city housings, who do within their spectrum of rents charge rents that are higher than $500, which would be maybe supported for ODSP, and therefore working households here locally. So I think it is important that we do make sure we keep in mind that the 3,000 units isn't just for people who are on ODSP, but it's also for many working households throughout and indeed across the city.
I appreciate it. And Graham, at some point, we're going to have a conversation about how we can facilitate people getting into the housing market with the help of CHMC, because right now your rent is higher than your mortgage.
Exactly.
So there's got to be a vehicle we can take advantage of. Thank you.
For sure.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. We have Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and always good to see and hear from you, Medora, on behalf of the YW in many circumstances, and Graham as well. So my main question is with all the great housing initiatives that have gone on in our community, past, current, different programs, different stakeholders, different agencies, some with tri-party agreements with federal, provincial, and the municipality, others with private sector. I've always asked this question when a new initiative, such as yours today, Hamilton is Home initiative, and with the motion that's going to be forthcoming later in the agenda, I always want to ensure there isn't a duplication or an overlap in terms of competing dollars. And my main concern has always been that I like the collective and the cooperative nature, and we're so blessed in our city, Madam Chair, to have the groups that we do, such as the two representatives today on behalf of many others. However, I always worry that if I'm supportive today, that a different group, if you will, doesn't come in 2 weeks from now and they have a different housing initiative, and I were to say, well, Madam Chair, I thought when Graham and Medora came in, they were kind of covering the entire spectrum. So long preamble to my question, Madam Chair, through you to either Medora or Graham, please.
Madam Chair, Medora, chime in on this. Councillor Jackson, you've put your finger on one of our biggest challenges, and indeed, our group of 7 at the time came together earlier this year, late winter, literally weeks before COVID, and upended all of our lives. And we sat around the table and said, we're all very familiar with each other. We've worked together, the Affordable Housing Flagship, many other kinds of collaboration tables, et cetera, for years, indeed, for some of us. But we've never actually worked together in this way. We're collegial, and yet we always compete for the same dollars. And sadly, it's always $5 million a year. We always apply for it together, separately, and then we're, one of us wins and the rest lose. And this is a pie that's way too small. And so while we hold we don't hold grudges over that because it's the way it is, we said, what can we do to answer Minister Tassie's question? What can we do to move the needle on affordable housing in Hamilton? The status quo isn't working. And so we have been meeting bi-weekly throughout COVID, teleconferencing like we're doing now, figuring out how to actually work together so we're not stepping on each other's toes, we're building on each other's strengths. And this is, I think, one of the key things that we are saying in this proposal is we're committing to working with each other to build on our strengths, not to compete, not in some sort of like non-monopolistic kind of way, but in a way that says, Vic Park has a very different capability than YW in terms of size, scale, focus of work. You know, Indwell does something different than Sacagawea, but we can work together to augment, you know, a very small organization's capabilities, but we're not Indigenous and they are, so they can do something existentially important that we can't. How do we work together in new ways? And I think that this is the key thing by us coming together to CMHC, by us working together with the city. We're not trying to like jockey for position in trying to get our own interests first. And I think that when we've had very, very helpful conversations with the housing division, particularly around how do we bolster their capacity to, you know, when we're all coming in with a different application with different standards of capability, it's hard for them to treat everyone equally, or not to treat they treat everyone fairly, but you can't treat everyone equally because not everyone's equally capable. So on our side, the proponent side, how do we raise our own capabilities internally so that we can each come to the city with an application that meets the Hamilton is Home standard? Any organization and any new organization is still free to come to the city to propose any project, to go to CMHC to propose any project.
Fair
but
enough.
If it has the Hamilton is Home stamp, the city, CMHC, the province knows that it's going to be, you know, it's going to meet these benchmarks for accessibility, energy efficiency, affordability, etc., and quality of planning applications even, so that we're capable, we're solid. Nobody's wasting time reviewing the Hamilton is Home application because they know it's coming in with a high level of professionalism.
Wow, Graham, what a terrific, comprehensive response. You've raised my comfort level. Very encouraging. Thank you very much for that response. Didn't know if Medora had anything to answer to that, or that covered it.
I think it covered it well through the chair. But I would just add that we continue to invite and welcome other groups to talk to us about joining Hamilton is Home. We have at least two. I have at least two waiting who are interested in meeting with us, and there's more I know on other people's lists. So that can continue to happen. It's not that anyone has to join Hamilton is Home in order to propose a good housing project. That's not our suggestion. But we are open and invite discussion and collaboration for those who are interested.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Medora, yes, sorry, Graham, please.
May I just build off of that slightly as well? So we have sort of the proponents, the key organizations that are going to actually build housing and sign contribution agreements with CMHC, et cetera. But there's many, many more organizations in Hamilton that support tenants who would live in these apartments or who need housing. And their work is stymied by the lack of available housing, particularly housing with supports. And we hear this day in, day out. Organizations that say, I spend all my time on the phone calling landlords to find a place for my client, or I've moved somebody 7 times in the last 6 months because they can't find a decent place to live that's not full of bed bugs or violence or whatever. And we have such inefficiency in our spectrum of services that we're already paying for because people can't find stable housing. And we see those organizations as allies rather than proponents in the Hamilton is Home, and we have a growing list of organizations that want to support this because they see the benefit for their clients in finding housing stability.
Well, Graham and Medora, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I always encourage individuality on any assignment, project, initiative in life. But I know that usually most teams that win championships are pulling together as a team. So that's, I'm really encouraged by what I've heard. Lastly, Madam Chair, just one last quick question. Councillor Clark may have alluded to it with his question. The 3,000 units sound eerily familiar to a previous presentation. Can I just presume, regardless of whether the previous presentation lives or dies, this is an initiative moving forward separately? That's my last question, Madam Chair. Thank you.
To you, Madam Chair, I'll take responsibility for answering that question because the confusion over that number may have arisen from the Board of Indwell picking an aspirational number that sounded perhaps quite familiar to Hamilton is Home in the commitment Indwell has made to be a part of the Hamilton is Home collective. Hamilton is Home is a proposal that has merit, it is feasible, it can be achieved with alignment of support from all levels of government and indeed our community. And Indwell is fully committed to Hamilton as home, and it is independent of any other proposal. But we do know that there are over 6,000 households on the waiting list in Hamilton. So if 3,000 adds to 3,000, sounds kind of like 6,000. So maybe that's a different answer.
Well, overall, I'm hearing a confirmation that it is a separation moving forward. So
that's correct.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson, for raising that question about the 3,000 homes. Councillor Nan.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you to the delegates for coming in this morning and sharing with the committee the strength of what is possible when we collectivize our resources and really build on our strengths in the community and build off of the legacy, the long legacy that many of the partners around this table have played in terms of supporting our residents and definitely helping this municipality as a community address our affordable housing needs. And I think, if anything, these times in COVID that we're all experiencing together now is a time more than ever to be collectivizing our resources and working in strong partnerships to achieve what's needed as we all kind of lift the boat together. I did have a couple of questions for staff on the proposal that's before us. So if this is an appropriate time, Councillor Pauls, as the chair versus asking questions of the delegation, if I may ask a few questions of staff as well.
Okay. Was Councillor Clark wanted to as well ask question to?
Yeah, I'd be happy to sequence after Councillor Clark as well, given that he indicated initially. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I was going to ask, relinquish my chair to Councillor Nan, but she asked the same question that I was going to ask, in a sense that when I met with Graham and Kiwanis, he mentioned that they were just getting together with all the affordable housing providers, and they were going to work together. And then all of a sudden, COVID came, and how much more important it is now that we work together for the province and the federal and the city to support this initiative. Hamilton is home. So thank you for raising that, Councillor Nan. And I'm going to turn to Councillor Clark for the second time to ask questions to staff.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So my question is around the city's role in the applications. I'm not sure if staff heard my question to Graham about the potential of the city vetting or reviewing the applications to provide our expertise to increase the likelihood of a potential approval. Is that something that we can do, or what does this committee have to do to have staff play that role?
Graham, Paul Johnson or?
Mr. Johnson, I guess, would be the first person,
okay.
Or Edward John, one of the two.
Edward John?
Thank you. Through the chair to the council, I'll be happy to answer that question. So housing services are well positioned to do and play that role. I think it's essentially the role that many of my team have played throughout this process of our CMHC funding applications. I think where the advantage being discussed today is the collective sharing of ideas, abilities to come forward with more robust applications. I would add that, you know, the CMHC process, unlike some of the provincial and combined processes, doesn't add administrative dollars to that function. So there would be a time commitment from staff, particularly given the size of the portfolio being discussed today. And I see in the motion being put forward that staff can actually come back and review those implications and bring that back to committee.
Thank you. Councillor Clark?
So is there any complications about us playing the role as the vetter of these applications? I guess I'm trying to figure out exactly what the role of the city is going to be in the application of Hamilton is Home for the housing collective.
Through the chair to the council. So it would be ultimately the same role we always play with the federal government in terms of our oversight, overview, and evaluation of the applications put forward. we would be determining criteria to which to evaluate against the expectations and outcomes of those funding processes. So it would be the same role. I think at this point, as Graham mentioned, it wouldn't be limited just to this application, but any providers willing to entertain an application to CMHC, we would still review in the same manner.
Through the chair, if I could also jump in, sorry, Councillor, to cut you off, but I think there's another advantage is that an initiative of this size and scope would require more than just Housing Services Division. You're talking about a significant impact on the planning department in particular, and on our legal services and so forth. So I think the earlier that we can be involved and play a role in understanding two things. One is, how can we perhaps move some particular projects forward that are easier to manage first and tranche them so that they don't all arrive on the desks of those that need to move it forward at the same time. Those are the pieces. So Jason and I have talked at length about the need for us to work together on this, because there's going to be the practical element of the city's involvement in all applications for building in the city, and we all know that well. But in this case, it would be easier for us to be there at the early stages, and we've structured that relationship with the planning department already through Housing Services. So the earlier the better from my perspective.
Thank you for that, Mr. Johnson. So when we're talking about an endorsement, are we endorsing the concept of the Affordable Housing Collective Hamilton is Home, 3,000 units, 1.125 billion? Or are we actually endorsing each application when it is fully vetted for approval?
So through the chair, I can provide to you what staff read this a bit as, and then certainly the mover of the motion can speak if it's different. I think at this stage we would see this as endorsement for the approach and the idea. This allows us as staff to talk with a group of people and not worry so much about an application process, and this would allow us to work with a whole group and say, what do we want to try and accomplish, and how would we move this forward, and also begin to have joint conversations if necessary with CMHC, because my personal opinion is doing this on an application by application basis, as Graham is not the right way. So Graham's talk about a portfolio approach will be important, and I think that the city can provide some valuable feedback in terms of why that's important from our perspective of how we actually get these things built with some pace. So I would not say that there are no projects on the table at the moment. These are where we might be going today. So we take it as, let's talk about how we can actually move this group or this coalition forward, more so than talking about specific applications.
So to paraphrase, Madam Chair, it would be staff's position that it would be appropriate and beneficial to keep the collective together as an entire conglomerate of housing projects going forward on behalf of the city and on behalf of the agencies, as opposed to individual applications one at a time with an endorsement from the city. Is that what I heard?
Through the chair, yes. In this case, this allows us to talk about things with that whole group at the same time, rather than seeing things come in fits and spurts. And it will allow us to have that very critical conversation about phasing and pacing of this work if we're actually going to get it completed. So very much in support of the way things have been presented here. And I know that Edward and his team like this idea as well.
Last question, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Johnson is aware, as we are all aware, about the financial challenges the municipality is having currently. Our deficit from COVID, although it is much smaller now that we've received that 45 million, we're still being very cautious in terms of what we're spending. And so has staff looked at the costing of staff time or what needs to be spent to do the work that we need to be done to get this collective over the finish line?
Through the chair, we haven't done that in any with any specificity. So that's what we would be bringing back, is to look at that, because again, it's a variety of people that may be involved, and quite frankly, this would provide us the ability to do just that, and also understand which of our staff teams. We know some of the people that will be involved, but I can tell you from working with these federal applications, I need to understand a bit more what the municipality's role is. Is it around planning for and looking for what types of units and how, and then the obvious planning work that we do and the building work that we do, or as in some applications, do we have a role in a legal capacity or a backstopping capacity, debt financing capacity that we need to think about? And I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying that we need to know that will then drive who we need on the team. Because it may be we need more lawyers in order to make sure the agreements are tight, than actually more of something else. But we'd like to go away and think about that. The other piece is just to allay fears wherever possible. This will be about aligning work towards a priority. It is entirely clear that from a strategic plan perspective and a council priority perspective, this is what you want to see happen in your term of council. So as much as possible, this may be about prioritizing work when we come back, not so much about hiring additional people.
In essence, expediting it.
Through the chair, correct.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the staff's candor. I think this is one of those projects where I'm thinking of all those metaphors, it's a full court press, we're all in it together, all of those types of metaphors about getting it done. This is one of those projects which should be our priority overall else in this community. So I'm supportive of this moving forward, and anything we can do to assist that, I'd be very pleased to be a party to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nan, second time.
Thank you through the chair to staff, and thank you, Councillor Clark, for those thorough questions. It leaves me with very few to ask now. So quick question to staff in terms of the what we've heard from CHMC in terms of the co-investment fund. The delegates had referenced that CHMC has clearly indicated that they have some underspent dollars in the portfolio, as well as the approach of moving from a per capita approach to a much more streamlined, focusing on viable projects. And if I could, through you, Chair, to hear from staff in terms of what staff's understanding at this point is with CHMC as a proponent at the table as well.
Asking staff.
Through the chair, I'm going to let Edward take this one.
Thank you, Paul. And through the chair to the councillor, absolutely. So, we've heard a number of times from CMHC about the concern about getting money out the door, getting viable projects built. I know they have extended to look at some of the private housing developers to look at some of these aspects. So they certainly are in that position. They do want to find projects that meet their outcomes, and they're very focused on those particular outcomes. And I go back to a point raised about this portfolio approach. I think what you'll find is the ability to really expedite not only a great number of properties and proposals, but also be able to quantify and qualify which priorities are being hit with each application. No one application can do all things.
All things, yeah.
With this approach, what we're actually able to do from a housing services perspective, and you'll see later on in my presentation around the action plan, is really understand where, how, and when we want projects developed, what they're meeting, and they're meeting them in the right time and the right capacity. So once again, I think this is a very attractive proposition, I imagine, to the feds based on that alone.
Thank you for that, Director John. And there was a question earlier posed around being considerate of a regional approach and being aware of the potential ongoing impact to the municipality in terms of the needs for supportive housing and the level of supportive services that would be required. Any assessment in terms of the other regions near us and what kind of activity they're engaged in right now. Are they also pursuing aggressively building new affordable units from a CHMC investment portfolio? Do you have any sense of whether it's Peel, whether it's Toronto, whether it's the Halton area, what might be on the horizon there and what we're seeing in terms of a trend, regionally speaking, in terms of Southwestern Ontario, as the problem it exists for all of our municipalities in terms of the housing crisis?
Through the chair to the council, certainly, Toronto are very open and put forward the message about the need for supportive housing. We've certainly seen it in our own area, and that connection between those health interventions and the stabilization of housing is critical. Some of our other neighboring regions don't necessarily have the same amount or capacity to respond as we do. I know, for instance, Peel looking more for the rental approach as opposed to some of the more significant housing with supports. But housing with supports, I think, everyone at this table has recognized that, for far too long, we haven't had the health investment in some of those housing developments, and that has led to some of that insecurity in housing and has undermined some of those successful tenancies. So we're absolutely on top of that. I mean, I think this COVID pandemic has highlighted it, but those gaps have existed and we've known how to fill them. It's about that coordination effort and putting your shoulder to the wall and making sure that we make some great movements in the next few months and years.
Thank you for that, Director. And my apologies, I keep saying CHMC. It's one of those acronyms that I totally, I get the M and the H as many times as I try. CMHAC. So the next question I had was just a supplement from Councillor Clark's question about the city's possible the steps or the investment that we could be making as a municipality that would qualify as co-investment. There was conversation about staff. There was conversation about the fact that it wouldn't be just housing services, that it would be also other divisions and interdivisionally a strategy as a city system responding to what's being presented in front of us. Is there anything else that could be qualified as a co-investment from the municipality?
Through the chair to the councillor. So in our discussions with CMHC, absolutely, they're very open to what really constitutes that co-investment. They're focused on the co-investment piece. This absolutely has to be a partnership in that respect, but it's not all direct financial support. So I know we have through this Affordable Housing Site Selection Subcommittee, another tough one to get out. So, we have identified lands which can be either used or constructed for the purposes of affordable housing. We're certainly aware of that land dedication approach being a very viable form of co-investment. And as you mentioned, they are looking at whether we can expedite through the process, which, has a non-monetary but important, significant impact on the timing. The staffing, and we may need to look at the process itself. This is a large volume of units that we're looking to achieve over a short period of time. Maybe just not making processes faster, but taking a look at some of those processes to see if they can be done differently to achieve outcomes in a faster time, maybe another appropriate way. But like I say, we're more than happy to investigate those full range and spectrum of non-financial means.
Thank you, Director John. I may take you up on that last piece in terms of the real estate and land dedication portion and just get clear about how we might be able to move strategically. The delegation has presented, I think on the slide you said 50 identified sites across the municipality. So it would be helpful to have our real estate division. And obviously, if this is more about the motion, happy to drill down there. But in terms of that interdivisional approach, the role that real estate could play in supporting some of that work as well in terms of land dedication. Thank you. Those are my questions.
And thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess I take a different approach, and I want to make clear no one has a monopoly on the best approach, but certainly we need to have some critical thinking through this process. And I'm taking 10 years at federal and provincial politics to understand how dollars are distributed. And I certainly know that former minister I worked for had a real issue with CHMC, I believe it is, in regards to the bureaucracy and the fact that they had all kinds of money. They just, any program, they weren't very good at getting it out. So it's the same organization we're talking about now. So the first question I have, and I hate thinking in a vacuum, but I do get to travel around Ontario. I go to small town Ontario, never mind Oakville and and so forth. So towns like Elliott Lake, there's a lot of communities that are desperate for housing to keep their seniors in who no longer can stay in their homes. And the problem is in many of those communities, they don't have a lot of capacity. They never put their hand out to the province and the feds. So what is the total amount of dollars that are being allocated to Ontario for the housing program out of that 50 million?
Chair Pauls, if I could maybe
Yes.
attempt to answer Councillor Whitehead. I don't know the number, and I'm not sure if they've actually said a number from CMHC. They have also broken the total national housing strategy into four main streams, and so it gets a little bit complicated to know what Ontario is getting, because the rental housing financing initiative is a financing only plan, and that's where a good bit of the money is allocated. It's projects in Newmarket last week. I believe Minister Hassan was announcing 365,000 per unit in financing towards a new condo tower there. So there is the willingness to invest heavily in individual projects and in individual communities, and it's not abundantly clear exactly how they make their decisions about where to invest. I think this is where, as a community, you mentioned your connections to provincial or federal, levels of government. I think that it's very important for each of us as individuals and as a city to really lean into those relationships, because Hamilton is unique in putting together this kind of collective effort. We're not seeing this in other places in nearly the same way, but Hamilton is represented federally and provincially by all parties. And so getting kind of a cooperation between the different levels of government, we may have a unique opportunity for that right now. That's beyond my,
but
others probably have more experience in that than I do.
Thanks, Graham. I asked the staff the question directly because there is staffing groups that work together, whether it's provincial or probably even at the federal level, and there's conversations and dialogue going at that level. So I'm trying to understand what we are soliciting from the conversations, because I'm having trouble understanding whether CTME would see this even more complicated as dealing with an individual application versus doing it through a portfolio approach, especially when the ask is so great across the whole province. So I'm trying to understand, have we already measured and determined that we have higher level of success taking this approach, an individual application approach, with one of the most heavy bureaucratic processes in Canada?
So through the chair, we have talked to CMHC about portfolio approaches, and in fact, as you know, we're in the final, we hope the very, very final stages of a portfolio approach ourselves to the rehabilitation of community housing through City Housing Hamilton. So rather than apply with each building for retrofitting and modernization of those buildings, we took a portfolio approach with that, and it translated to a combined, if you put in the municipal contributions and the contributions of the program, $170 million give or take ask. So they are open to it. And to your earlier question, none of us have seen how the allocations break down. It is not done on a there is this much available type of piece. They've told us that, but there is somewhere, obviously, somebody is balancing out the piece. It's not all going to go to a few communities or a couple of provinces. So we don't know what's available. And I think on the portfolio approach side, I don't think that we're in any greater we're not in a negative space by beginning that conversation to say, and if it becomes very obvious that it is too complicated, then I would assume that the coalition would, rather than bang on with an idea that's not going to have traction, be open to some other way of making it work. But I think there's actually going to be some strong willingness to look at a portfolio approach on this, just based on our previous conversations in other files.
I appreciate that. And again, I'm not moving from naivety. I'm moving from my many years of experience at both levels of government, that if $1.2 billion came to Hamilton, specifically on the housing program, and Northern Ontario, which I remember were fighting to become separate because they weren't getting their fair share of the tax dollar, there would be a bloody hell to pay.
So there is, no matter how you shake this, there's going to be a geographic component in the distribution of dollars, no matter how pragmatic approach you take. And I want to be realistic about that and work within that constraint, because if we don't acknowledge and understand that constraint, sometimes you ask too much, they'll just go and deal with the individual applications for Ontario, and that's concerning. Because when you come in with big proposals and everyone's coming with individual proposals, I'm not exactly sure how that's going to cash itself out. But that's my caution. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. For the third time, Councillor Clark.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So can I just get clarification, because I listened very carefully to Councillor Whitehead, and he's raising some very valid points. So what I thought I heard was that their CMHC is going to be receiving individual agency applications for their individual portfolios that collectively make up the 1.25 billion. That we're not submitting a $1.25 billion application, and here's all the housing projects, and just approve it all together. Can I just get clarification, whether it's from staff or Graham or whoever? Because I thought that's what I heard.
So Graham, would you like to answer that, please?
Through Chair Pauls. That's correct, Councillor Clark. Each individual organization would apply to CMHC for the funding for their specific project under the Hamilton is Home banner. We sometimes joked about putting it in a colored folder so that they know that it's coming with the purple folder, therefore it's meeting the Hamilton is Home standards, expectations, and commitments. But it does have to be reviewed on a project by project basis so that each individual organization is capable of carrying that financially, is capable of delivering on the commitments, etc. The portfolio is an approach to say, as a community, we can deliver this and deliver on these expectations. And so therefore consider it based on that, so that Sacagawea has equal footing with Indwell in getting a project approved and assessed and delivered, rather than, the power structure that, may be inherent to large scale organizations and small scale organizations trying to compete for the same attention. But they do have to consider each project on its own merits in terms of particularly its financial capability to withstand, the test of time.
And secondly, can I just get clarification? I think I heard that Adam Vaughan, who's the member of parliament, and I don't remember his riding. I'm ashamed to admit that. He's the parliamentary secretary to the prime minister, however, and he's the point person on affordable housing. He has been making statements, as has the government, that they're not looking at a per capita plan of spreading the money out evenly amongst municipalities. They're wanting successful applications to be approved as quickly as possible. Is that correct?
That is correct. I personally have heard MP Vaughan numerous times say exactly that.
Yeah, I think it's important that my colleagues hear that, because Councillor Whitehead is absolutely correct. The normal process is they got to be regionally and politically balanced, because you don't want to upset your members of parliament. And I mean, quite honestly, it's usually the partisan Liberal Party that would get the largesse of the units, but they try to spread them out equally across municipalities. That has not worked in the past. It's watered down the applications and limited frequently the number of applications that can get approved, because some municipalities don't get their ducks lined up to get it in there, whereas others are waiting and got applications ready to roll, but they can't because they don't meet the per capita grant number. So this process seems to be more merit-based, and I think we should give it a shot. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
May I just add to that? Medora and I did speak with Anthony Adrian, who's the CMHC representative for this region, maybe 3 weeks ago or so. And he said that, as an internal staff person, they also have, commitments they have to hit, targets that they have to hit in terms of projects that they facilitate, and jobs that are, you know, buildings that get built, units that get built. So he was very excited about exploring this portfolio of individual projects with us as Hamilton is Home, because, you know, from his perspective, he could be deemed to have helped a number of organizations become successful in delivering on CMHC's commitments, and they are having a bit of a challenge getting projects approved and out the door. So he was excited to be working with with us as organizations together.
And finally, Madam Chair, if I may, I just want to thank Graham for clarifying the confusion with the Commonwealth Games and their affordable housing aspect. His comments clarified that for me today, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. I see there's no more speakers on the, oh, sorry, Councillor Whitehead, second time?
Third time, actually.
Third time, okay.
Yeah. I didn't ask the question to staff. So the last time I checked, although COVID's probably put a huge dent in it, but at peak, we were doing just less than 2,000 units a year in the context of overall build in the city of Hamilton. We're looking at, did I hear 3,000 units in 3 years?
Yes. Graham?
So through the chair, that's correct. And in the initial conversation that we had, we have indicated to the group that this would represent a 50% increase in our yearly total for the entire city. And that is entirely why we can't just say, you know, normal course of business, normal course of activity, that we would be able to support all of that. So you're absolutely correct. And you're also correct. I don't know what the latest things are, but Jason didn't seem to think we'd be way off the normal routine. And it is a significant increase on a year-over-year basis. So we have that challenge. We also have the challenge that, you know, quite frankly, most of the other approvals going to other communities are spread over many, many more years. So we will have to work alongside you, I would expect, as elected officials, to figure out how CMHC can actually be a more nimble supporter of this type of activity. Their usual time frame for projects is over a much longer number of years.
Yeah, and I did highlight that in my earlier comments that the minister I worked for, her biggest criticism was that particular organization, because they had a lot of money they never spent because of a lot of the programs they didn't know how to, you know, either no one was meeting the criteria or the metrics, or they just didn't know how to get it out. And that's always been a long standing criticism of that particular agency of the federal government. You know, I didn't say anything about per capita spending, but I can guarantee you if Ontario gets less than Alberta or Quebec based on our needs in Ontario, there'll be hell to pay. So I think elections come around, we're dealing with a minority government. I can promise you that if people think that there's not a geographic consideration, it's not per capita spending now. I'm talking about geographic consideration in regards to all the expenditures. Then we're just being naive and we're fooling ourselves. So let's be pragmatic, let's be practical, and let's be careful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I see there's no other speaker on the list, so we're going to continue. We will require, okay, we'll require an electronic vote. Please indicate your vote now.
Sorry, Madam Chair, what are we voting on?
Oh, we're voting on to receive the delegates, appoint delegation 7-1 to receive the delegations 7.1 and 7.2. And I need a mover and a seconder, actually. Mover is Councillor Nan and Councillor Clark. Thank you. We will require electronic vote. Please indicate your vote now. Okay. Everybody voted? And that's carried. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Nan, would you like to put the motion through now?
It's the will of the chair in terms of the agenda and how you'd like it to flow. If you wanted to wait until after the staff presentation as well, which is focusing on our 5-year review of housing and our homelessness strategy as a municipality. I think there's a lot of context there that I'd actually like to hear from staff prior to presenting the motion, if that's acceptable by the chair.
Actually, it is, because actually we need more information. That's an excellent point. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to move on to staff presentation. And I would like to call upon Edward John to begin the staff presentation. Thank you. John?
Good morning, Chair, members of Council. Bear with me as I just share content of this presentation. So I'm hopeful everybody can see the screen.
Yes.
And with that, I'd just begin by saying my utmost thanks to my team, the division, who've really stood behind this Housing and Homelessness Action Plan 5-year review. It's been a while in formation. A number of things have occurred which have really added value to this. And most notably, obviously, just before we come to unveil it, COVID hits, and we take a fresh look at this for what it has and has not happened over the last few months. On that basis, I mean, discussing the housing and the homelessness action plan now is really timely, as COVID-19 has changed the housing and homelessness discussion in several ways. COVID-19 has and continues to shine and exacerbate the gaps in the housing and support systems. COVID-19 has put additional attention on the importance of home to every person. The overarching message of the last few months is that staying at home is safe. The flip side is that if you don't have a home, you are not safe. People who have never needed support previously are now finding themselves in difficult circumstances as a result of the pandemic. The goals of this plan are therefore to ensure that everyone, including our most vulnerable citizens, have a home that enables them to be resilient in the face of hardship, such as a pandemic. That the housing system builds resilience and treats everyone equitably and with dignity. The pandemic doesn't change the solutions and goals of this plan, but emphasizes and accelerates the need to enact them. In March, city staff and the community agencies in the housing and homelessness and health sectors came together immediately and worked hard to ensure that people in need of housing services received them and stayed safe. There has been significant positive feedback from the province and other municipalities about our success over the entire pandemic, with to date only 3 clients in the homelessness serving system being tested positive for COVID-19. Housing Services Division staff and the community service providers are continuing to work to fill the gaps, adapt services, add new services, and plan new ways of addressing housing and homelessness challenges. The Housing and Homelessness Action Plan was endorsed by Council December 2013. In 2019, a 5-year review of the plan was done to review the implementation to date and update the plan. The original Housing and Homelessness Action Plan had 5 outcome areas, 16 target metrics, and 54 strategies. These 5 outcomes organize the strategies into the areas of supply, affordability, supports, quality, and equity. The plan was created by the community to be comprehensive to address Hamilton's housing needs and drive the systemic changes needed to ensure that everyone in Hamilton has a home. Implementation of the plan saw many systems changes, including advocacy to upper levels of government regarding funding and planning regulations, system changes focused on housing first principles, the development of thousands of hundreds of new affordable housing units, process changes that have increased focus on client services, bringing the access to housing waitlist into the Housing Services Division, and many more. Locally, much of the work was done through Council, including the creation of a $50 million poverty reduction fund and the new municipal housing allowance program. The city's primary goals for the 5-year review included driving innovation and system-level change to create better housing outcomes for people, increasing emphasis on the equity outcome area, including greater emphasis on housing for Indigenous peoples and a GBA plus analysis, streamlining the plan to make more it more applicable to day-to-day work in the housing system. As the impacts of housing and its lack are broad, streamlining the plan was a challenge. It was decided that the plan would focus on driving change into the future. So many matters that are being addressed through current work and existing processes were removed from the document and picked up in other documents, such as Housing Services Division work plans. The provincial government provided direction for the 5-year review that the updated plan must include objectives that are SMART targets relating to housing needs. SMART targets, which are achievable, were a shift from the 2013 plan that set targets based on full community housing needs. This was addressed by adding a description of how progress towards the objectives and targets will be measured, strategies to measure and report publicly on progress under the plan. The provincial government required 8 areas of focus and updated housing and homelessness plans. These were accountability and outcomes, goal of ending homelessness, coordination with other community services, Indigenous peoples, a broad range of community needs, non-profit housing corporations and non-profit housing cooperatives, the private housing market, and finally, climate change and environmental sustainability. With respect to SMART targets, SMART is an acronym which stands for specific, so what you plan to achieve is very clear. The M is for measurable. There is a way to determine whether you have achieved it. Achievable, so that those goals are realistic and attainable. So the relevant is the R, so that aligns with the goals and policy perspective. And then finally, time bound. So a time frame is specified for when results are to be achieved. In terms of the consultation, over 500 people have been consulted on this review. A working group provided in-depth input throughout the various steps of the review process. Groups consulted, some multiple times, and consultation events included our Housing and Homelessness Action Plan Planning Group, a Housing and Homelessness Advisory Committee, ongoing dialogue with the Indigenous community, including 2 Indigenous-focused public events, several meetings with the Hamilton Executive Directors Aboriginal Coalition, and the Aboriginal Advisory Committee, as well as meetings with individual Indigenous community leaders. Online in-depth survey of housing experts such as the agency management and frontline staff, including Indigenous organizations. In-depth responses informed all aspects of the review with a particular focus on the strategy, visions, and new targets. Engagement with private sector developers at the Development Industry Liaison Group and thorough individual discussions supplemented much of our learning, as well as city staff from the Housing Services Division and other city departments, the mayor and all city councillors, joint meeting with members from the council advisory committees, and feedback that was originated from the 2019 Hamilton Housing Summit. An environmental scan, data analysis, and needs analysis were also conducted, with the results showcased in the community profiles attached to the report. Taking the incredible feedback received from stakeholders on both the implementation of the action plan over 5 years and how the system has changed since 2013, a revised action plan was developed. The goal of this revision is to be concise and create a living document that could be revised annually as required to ensure the flexibility to address new trends to best serve Hamilton's vulnerable populations. The action plan development was led by the Housing and Homelessness Action Plan Planning Group and had continuous input from the Housing and Homelessness Advisory Committees to ECS. The review of the action plan was submitted to the province in fall 2019 for review. They completed their review in January 2020. The revised action plan continues to support 5 outcome areas around supply, choice, supports, quality, and equity. 21 SMART targets will track the implementation of the plan over the next 5 years. These targets provide specific measures that can be reported on annually. As the impacts of housing and its lack of broad, streamlining the plan was challenging. It was decided that the plan would focus on driving change into the future, so any matters that are being addressed through current work and existing processes were removed from the document and picked up in other documents. The entire plan was reviewed. The vision that everyone has a home, home is the foundation. Principles and outcome areas were retained as is. The strategies, targets, and actions were revised significantly. The revision of the plan focuses on what system changes are needed for the next 5 years and not what is already being done and in place. 67 details implementation points, provide the roadmap for what strategy needs to be developed, what regulations need to be changed, and key communication items to engage stakeholders, create more affordable housing opportunities in Hamilton. And I'll spend just a quick couple moments in terms of some of those examples of outcomes. And outcome one, which we'll be initiating very shortly, is this development of a strategy and implementation plan to increase the supply of secondary rental units. We recognize that secondary rental units play a very pivotal part in terms of the availability of choice in the housing market, and that this is under pressure both through zoning changes, potential changes in people's economic abilities, and as well as minimize the loss of existing rental units as we look to ensure health and safety standards and zoning standards are conformed. Currently, work is undertaken right now approaching a systems approach to this in order to ensure that not only do we develop a model to increase the amount of secondary rental units, but also look at the same time to protect those that exist. The other outcome area and strategy that we have been focused on, and I really just want to draw attention to this because this is the increased the number and effectiveness of housing allowances and rent supplements. And I think it goes without question that through COVID, where this has been not only a challenging time for all, but particularly when you're looking to rent out new units, when we're looking to align people with those units, both with the landlord, the individual, and ensure the supports are there. We, through our COB, which is our Canada Ontario Housing Benefit, actually through the pandemic, through those challenging times, managed to house over 105 households, a significant amount of which were homeless until that point. So in terms of Hamilton's action plan, it also included 14 stretch targets, which ensure that the depth of challenges we face in Hamilton are highlighted and that the aspirational nature of the original plan are not lost while we focus on moving forward in a positive direction over the next 5 years. The stretch goals acknowledge the reality that more resources are required to resolve and solve these challenges over the next 5 years, and that we've had the resources to do that. The development of the action plan was driven by Housing Services, but strongly supported by our many community partners. A person-centered approach to housing and homelessness has been a core value for the HHAP since its inception. This means assessing the specific housing and support needs of individuals and matching households to the housing and support services that best meet their needs, preferences, and self-identification, such as Indigenous peoples, youth, families, newcomers. The Housing Services Division is committed to continuing its strengthen the active practice of equity, diversity, and inclusion principles in its work. This means recognizing and working to address disproportionate structural barriers faced by individuals and groups, ensuring equity is fundamental to all decisions, and meaningfully consulting with those impacted by the division's work. The work of integrity, equity, diversity, and inclusion principles into the foundations of the division's daily practice will be strengthened and supported by the implementation of the forthcoming corporate-wide and housing-specific equity, diversity, and inclusion frameworks. Gender-based analysis plus provides structured analytical processes that can be applied to a wide range of issues to assess how diverse groups of women, men, and non-binary people may experience policies, programs, services, and initiatives, and help ensure that the public policy decisions result in more equitable and inclusive impacts. The implementation of a GBA plus reporting will be done in a consistent manner with the corporate direction. So that brings me to the conclusion of my presentation. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions.
May I have a mover and a seconder to put the report to the floor? Councillor Clark and Councillor Nan. Thank you. All right. And is there any questions on this item? First, there's Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. So with regards to the secondary suites, the province made them a right back in 2003, so about 13 years ago. Do we have any indication yet when that's going to be happening in Hamilton? I know we have been talking about this residential zoning bylaw for a long time. I know for a fact that it's very costly to get a secondary suite approved in any of the wards that are outside wards 1 through 8. For example, in Stony Creek, it's the policies are not in place currently. So when will that happen?
So through the chair to the councillor, and thank you for bringing me back to my planning days for struggling with the consolidation of a residential zoning bylaw, and that it still continues today. So we are aligned with that plan. So housing services have developed an ability to create a framework for inciting the development of secondary suites that will go hand in glove with those permissions that will come through the consolidated zoning bylaw. So we are tailing towards the end of this year to release that support program. And it will look at just general support through the development of all secondary suites throughout the city of Hamilton within all wards. And on top of that, we will then look for more focused investment into areas where we can maybe affect the rent of those units, bring them down to a level that we would consider affordable and impactful for that community, and work with homeowners through that. The recognition of this, though, is that we certainly are turning normal homeowners into developers. So there's a little bit of education on both sides of that approach.
Correct.
So, you know, we've had a few examples and learned from some of those approaches where we can improve. But certainly that ability to recognize that these are often lay individuals who are putting forward a significant investment, leveraging against their own homes. We want to make sure that we set them up with the fewest obstacles to that process. And that's kind of the mindset when we go forward. And you know, we've had great success in this by department discussion on how best to improve the secondary suites. The other piece to add to this is also the licensing impact and where that discussion lands. You know, the last thing we want to do is lose what we have existing today. And as you can imagine, you know, if you are a landlord and you have 3 units, but you're only permitted to have 2, it's typically the most affordable unit that then gets lost in order to bring into conformity. So we are looking at approaches to which we can protect those most affordable units. And once again, this is an oversight in terms of how we're approaching our plan on a citywide basis, knowing where that demand is, whether it's for larger households, smaller households, and what those price points are for rent.
So I think what I heard is that you're working with the planning department directly in terms of the drafting of the new residential zoning bylaw, but in parallel to that, as they are going through that planning consultation process, you are preparing the policies and procedures to implement secondary suites once the zoning bylaw is approved. So there's 2 processes happening, the planning process and then your policy process in terms of how you implement it. And that's happening at the same time. Is that what I heard?
Through the chair to the councillor, correct, absolutely. We didn't want to lose the opportunity to improve some of those experienced obstacles when it comes to secondary suites. Of course, best practice when it comes to planning, and there are other implications such as parking, landscaping, but we also wanted to make sure that we were at the table with that voice of the process itself, understanding that these will be typically landlords, residential owners who haven't become developers in the past.
Yeah, they're moms and dads. They're the average Joe citizen. So I'm very pleased to hear that, Mr. John, that we're not going to have this 2-year window where now we have to figure out how to implement what we've approved in the planning bylaw, that we've actually, we're doing it on a parallel list. Can I ask a question? And I'm not sure if I can find the form. It seemed to be a letter that came in from a minister. And it's Appendix B. And it says in here that they're implementing an enumeration of homeless and they're collecting names. So we're creating lists of homeless. Is that what the intent of the ministry is?
Through the chair to the council, so we do have our by name list. So anytime we have engagement, interaction within homeless individuals or individuals sleeping rough, we add them to that list. We try and make sure that we have that connection and continue that connection to make sure that we can provide the supports necessary.
So this isn't something new. This is something that we've been doing all along?
I don't have, through the chair to the council, I don't have the exact date when we began the by name list, but certainly it's been over the last several years.
And it's interesting because it talks about they're implementing it, a by name list approach beginning in 2021. So is this something that Hamilton was doing and no one else was doing, or were other municipalities doing this at the same time?
Through the chair to the council, yeah, this speaks to the regional approach to looking at some of those issues as opposed to the municipality level.
And have we reviewed the security of that list? Because I'm always nervous when we're starting to collect personal data for policy purposes. So how do we ensure that MFIPA is being complied with, in essence, privacy by design features for this named list of homeless people?
Through the chair to the council, absolutely, and it's also a concern when we look at some of the GBA plus approach and equity approach in terms of what we use and how we use that data. So we have those checks and balances in place, and absolutely share your concerns with the sharing of data, which hasn't been properly reviewed.
So we have policies in place on privacy by design, and we've had staff look at who has access to this list and how we control this list to ensure that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands.
Through the chair, correct. So we have staff through that point in time collection, which has occurred, where we get that information, and you know, we review it for all those concerning pieces to ensure that the information is secure and there is no conflict with that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And to be fair, I ask these questions on numerous policies when it deals with privacy by design. We celebrate the fact that we've moved to access by design, but equally we have to make sure that we're protecting the residents' identity and information. So that's why I ask those questions. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Okay, next, Councillor Whitehead.
Yeah, can I, John? I guess I've been a bit frustrated with the length of time it is taken to do the bylaw to allow as a right, consistent with the province, accessory housing in homes. So, and then I mean, I've got recent ones with looking converting the garages into in-law suites. Help me understand why, like, we're talking years now. Why is it taking so long?
Through the chair to the councillor, I do believe that this has been caught up in the residential zoning bylaw consolidation. So the kind of marrying of 6 previous zoning bylaws into one residential approach. I know you're right, from the act, changes in the act where they permitted this as of right. There have been within some of our bylaws the ability to do this. I know Hamilton, former Hamilton, was one of the more progressive zoning bylaws that was able to do this. And it's about creating that ability throughout. From housing services perspective, we want to make sure that while they entertain and allow these uses throughout the city, that we're also coming in with a framework and a policy and program that supports it so it actually gets developed at a more meaningful number. So we don't want just the permission being there, we want it to actually look and be implemented at a larger scale. And that means really drilling down to some of those typical constraints that occur through the planning process, and trying to create less of a bureaucratic process, make sure that individuals who are looking to invest actually know what the investment is up front. So I know in the past when we have had laneway houses, when we've had some of these secondary suites, unfortunately, just because people aren't completely mindful of the process, you know, they see development charges come late at the game, they see these tax increases that occur. So we're really doing that education piece, so people go into it full eyes open, but they're also able then to continue to work with us if they do want to reduce some of those rents. If we can subsidize some of those programs in an intentional way, we're going hand in glove with that planning permission. The last thing we wanted to do is just let planning permit this throughout the city, and then us come back and try and amend some of those issues that have been typically experienced by those trying to develop these types of properties. So we're taking it from a slightly different grasp. I mean, planning are overseeing obviously the good planning practices, but we're also trying to make this user-friendly and intentional in design.
So I'm super supportive of eventually getting there, but I'm also super sensitive to not all places are right. And I heard one speaker say that this is mom and pops. No, it's not just mom and pops. In fact, I got corporations buying up houses in certain areas of my neighborhoods. And I'll give you one that was recent. It was an application. It was a secondary suite in the basement of a semi-detached on Stone Church. It's a corporation of Ottawa. It's a consortiums. So they're making investment, buying residential houses, and they're converting them. Or in this case, making them safe and bringing them back into compliance and so on, which is a good news. But still, it's not a mom and pop operation, is my point. It's a revenue generation for obviously people to see an opportunity. So I guess my concern, though, we're talking about a semi-detached on Stone Church, very busy, active roadway, a negative driveway, only one vehicle, then you got a boulevard, and of course there's issues with the boulevard being blocked for visuals. So I'm hoping on a go-forward basis that we are sensitive to that visual line of sighting and parking, because of course there's nothing near the middle of Stone Church between Cortland and McIntosh, for example, where you can park a car. There is no place. Either your driveway or you're going quite a distance to park it on somebody else's street.
Through the chair to the council, you're correct. I mean, the experience of secondary suites throughout the city is a different one depending on which ward and what it is being geared towards. And absolutely, planning we'll be looking at that character aspect, that landscape aspect, and that functionality, which is the parking. And I know, in Ward 1, Ward 2, to a lesser extent, you have some of those pressures. Certainly, in your former ward from Mohawk, those pressures of tandem parking and those types of things, which are being addressed. Once again, the role here is to create a program that once we get through some of that issue, we're actually able to increase the amount of these units built in the right way and protect those that are most affordable as well.
I appreciate I only raise that because I live on McIntosh, and I can tell you that with the townhouse, because we're surrounded by townhouses, the inner neighborhood has no parking in front of any of the homes, and it's not because they're using it. These are people coming from far and wide, and double parking. So we're talking on both sides. In the wintertime, you can't even get through. Yet not one of those cars are residents that live actually in that neighborhood. They live in a different neighborhood. So I'm concerned that that we weight the issue of providing the adequate rules and machinations around the zoning to understanding what impacts it will have on neighborhoods. The last piece is, and this is one I mentioned earlier, and we were having this conversation with a number of us on the weekend over the phone, so COVID separation, but it was about how mortgages now are cheaper with taxes included than the average rent at $1,400-1,500 a month for a 2-bedroom. So is there an opportunity to work with CHMC or whatever the organization is and start a strategy, if this is sustainable, to enter new people in the market by foregoing, say, down payments in certain circumstances? Because it's ridiculous that they don't get equity, and it's a real challenge is affordability issue even to get into a rental, a 2-bedroom rental, when in fact in a home, not only is the rent cheaper than the actual mortgage and taxes, but they actually have an opportunity to generate revenue from renting an apartment or another unit out, again, offset their costs and actually introduce more affordability to people that have been locked out of the market. So I hope that we start looking at some creative ways that we can lobby the other levels of government to facilitate this new approach, especially in light of where our markets are on rent.
And through the chair to the council, I think you really picked up on a critical piece there, which is building that resilience. And when people have the equity in a home, they have that resiliency. And, there are certain stories, which, when I was working on the planning files in Pier 7 and 8, where there were individuals who owned their homes, paid them off, but the tax assessment increases had slowly gone up to the point where it was equivalent to their mortgage payments. These types of initiatives where you can potentially contemplate taking equity out of the home, developing a secondary unit, it builds that resilience in that individual household to actually pay those increasing tax assessment prices. They can then choose potentially to live in either the built unit or rent that out. And once again, it's not just about the individual renter. It is sometimes when you look at this, the resilience piece that this can build. And, you know, that's why we're not putting all our eggs in the basket when it comes to secondary suites, but it is a very pivotal part of which we really need to ensure we have a robust program so that it can do what it can to build that rental demand.
Great work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Last speaker, Councillor Nan.
Thank you through the chair, and thank you to the Housing Services staff for this update and all the work that was done. The consultation process alone, I know how long that process took and the thoroughness that staff engaged in it, and the delay post-COVID and getting the report back from the province and getting it in front of this committee. So I appreciate all the heavy lifting that staff have done and for getting this comprehensive report in front of us. I think what I'm most excited about, honestly, to be real, Frank, is the tracking and monitoring and reporting on an annual basis in terms of where we're headed in terms of our population outcomes that we as a council and a city system are aiming to achieve as it relates to homelessness, and increasing our ability to provide the range of affordable housing that the city is in need of, but also continues to experience accelerated, like the numbers keep going up in terms of the need, right? So in so many ways, we're constantly moving against a target that's continuing to move due to the pressures in the private market. But I did have a couple comments on some specifics in the report, if I could, through the chair to staff, related to the stretch targets as well as some of the outcome areas. So it was mentioned, I believe, in strategy 2 as it relates to increasing the number of new affordable rental units outside the downtown core annually at a rate of 25%, which I think is critically important, specifically in the context of the need to avoid over-concentrating affordable units in any one particular geographic area in the city, and what that does in terms of compounding other social impact issues. And the need is actually all across the city. And I think that there is a misconception often, because of the way in which these stories are often shared, that the deepest need for affordable housing is only in the lower city. And if I could, through you, Chair, to staff, if I could get some comment on that in terms of the goal of increasing intensification and the importance of increasing intensification throughout the city and not just in the downtown core.
Through the chair to the councillor, and thank you for the question. And, you know, absolutely, with this plan, we want to be intentional throughout the city in terms of where we're providing choice. And I think you picked up on it. You know, choice isn't just you know, certain subsidized housing in the downtown. Choice exists throughout throughout Hamilton. It's certainly something we're trying to encourage and be more intentional over. We're really looking and drilling down into some of those needs. So recognizing where in the city, at what household size, at what level of rent you would need to really have that ability to have that choice. And you know, that's part of why we're looking to focus on secondary units. Is one of the best ways to do this. It really does open up that choice throughout, and does give the individual households that opportunity. So, you know, we are taking a geographical basis to this. That doesn't discount the fact that in our downtown we have a number of infrastructure and services that are really geared to some of the deeper affordable needs. There's no way around that, but we're also believing we can deliver change and understand, you know, where there is transit, where there is opportunities, that we are providing that choice. And you know, by design, we'll be approaching that in that manner and looking for and exploring all and every avenue to which to achieve that.
Yes, and then from a intensification perspective and choice perspective, we have such a beautiful range of facilities and services throughout the city. Access to green space is much more accommodated in areas outside the downtown core, in our municipal boundaries. Access to, you know, newer recreation facilities, art centers that are going to be invested. These are all the types of amenities that people, regardless of income, regardless of ownership versus rentership as a household, deserve to have access to. So I'm looking forward to seeing how we're meeting those targets, understanding that there's going to be a number of solutions in that spectrum that help achieve that geographic spread of affordability throughout the city. So looking forward to tracking that one. On strategy 4, if I could, through the chair to staff, I'm excited about this strategy because it speaks to co-living solutions and cooperative ownership models that had previously, I think, as a municipality and also nationally, we had such an incredible movement towards cooperative housing in earlier iterations, and subsequent federal governments have divested from supporting cooperative ownership, and particularly in a COVID context, in a post-COVID context, the role that housing plays in as a stimulus tool, but also as a um, quality of life. And speaking to the point that you made earlier, Director John, about being able to diversify the ways in which we can ensure people have homes to be safe in. Whether in the context of this pandemic or future versions or other compounding issues. So I just wanted to hear from you, if I could, through the chair, about some of those co-living strategies or ideas that are currently at the table, and what your thoughts are in terms of, do you think this is an area that we can realistically grow in the city in terms of cooperative home ownership? And what are some examples of co-living that we've seen in our city to date that we might want to explore expanding on in order to meet this target?
Through the chair to the councillor, and once again, thank you for the question. So, you know, absolutely, we have this person-centered approach to how we want to provide housing, and that means, you know, meeting their needs, not creating what we believe is the solution. So the engagement piece was key to that, and understanding from that engagement, you know, there is a lot of demand in the system for these innovative ways. What they require us to be is kind of flexible and nimble. And I mean, I don't want to talk too much about COVID-19, but I think what we've demonstrated as a municipality is exactly how nimble and flexible we can do and be when we come to achieving some of these outcomes. So we've really tried to weave that through all the outcomes in terms of the flexibility. And I know you mentioned cooperative housing, which, you know, back in the day was actually far more heavily represented in our community and was a very functional form of housing. The issue with flexibility on that one is obviously the funding arrangements where we've try to encourage new kind of cooperative housing. It is seen as a potential solution. But the way that they're set up currently today, you know, with the oversight that we would need from any funding relationship, we've got to work on how we balance that out. But from an actual development in terms of housing, it functions really well. As those who know cooperative housing, it's very grassroots, it's built up. The board is really those residents who are looking to improve that. And you know, we have a few still in the city that are doing great. We are looking at the opportunity of funding envelopes through our COCHI and OFI streams, and we've been communicating with them to see exactly how we can stimulate either growth or sustainability through their own business plans. And we are thankfully having some productive discussions about growth of one cooperative and sustainability of another. The ability to get this more as a housing solution, we're going to explore some of those options as well. But absolutely, it sits there in that housing spectrum as something we can't overlook.
Thank you. And then the final area, if I can, through the chair, is outcome 4 in terms of good quality and safe housing throughout our city. And in reviewing the kind of steps to achieve this, there's a lot of intervention points that speak to community housing, but in an area that I know that we've heard a lot as a council table, where there are concerns, is in the private sector as it relates to our current standard in bylaw, what is covered, what isn't covered under property standards, what ought to be considered to be added, given some of the reoccurring issues that we're seeing in the private market. Do you see it feasible through the chair to you, Director John, to do a review of our existing bylaw and property standards as well in order to achieve an outcome that guarantees that dignity and safety piece that outcome 4 speaks to?
Through the chair to the councillor, I'd certainly be happy to be part of those discussions. And I do know where this is coming from in terms of some of the experiences we've seen and some of the conflicts and problems that have occurred between landlord and tenant as they go to, I mean, often this is brought into the rent eviction discussions. And even before it gets to that point, it's just creates a situation within the multiple dwelling or housing unit that just isn't productive for the long-term health and safety of individuals going forward. So it's absolutely, I'd be happy to look at, and I know through your office we've looked at some of the strategies that we've already put in place about education, understanding, and where we can advocate and where we can support. particularly when it comes to above guideline increases, those types of approaches where I think we've got work to do. And I think this pressure is actually going to be increasing as we go through the next few months. And I think that's really where we've got to focus on how we use innovative strategies to support individuals, whether it's because they are facing financial difficulties, whether it be from CERB tax repayments, whether it's been from loss of employment through jobs. We are talking with our Housing Help Center in terms of a robust approach to that. And we're contemplating a number of strategies that will add to that resiliency and take them to this time. But I do think though long term, the rent evictions and the unit conditions is absolutely something we can take a deeper drill into.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I definitely will follow up in exploring the next steps on that one. And final comment, if I can, through the chair. It's my understanding that in the evictions component, and we'll likely deal with this as an entire council table, as I know that there's discussions about what Bill 184 has potentially done in terms of our current, what we're working towards through this strategy, and then the exasperation of some of the issues, not only from a COVID context, but specifically with Bill 184, when the evictions were banned, and now with the eviction ban being lifted, it's my understanding that 323 Hamilton addresses are in application for eviction at the tenant board currently. And that definitely is a concern to everybody around the table in terms of the pressure that potentially poses in an immediate sense for the strategies that we've been putting in place from an emergency lens in terms of the sheltering. But back to your point, which the strategy is aiming to accomplish, which is the permanent housing solutions that our municipality needs in order to deal with our existing problem, let alone the potential surge of 323 applications that are under review for evictions at the board currently. Thank you. Those are my questions for now.
Thank you, Councillor Nan. I'd like to give the chair to Councillor Nan. I would like to ask a couple of questions. Edward John, are the Housing and Homeless Action Plan, are the RCF also involved in the strategy?
Through the chair to the councillor. So absolutely, we include RCFs in terms of that spectrum of housing. As this committee may be aware, we're actually in the midst, and I hate saying if it wasn't for COVID, but if it wasn't for COVID, bringing forward some of the modernization and updates to the RCF model, understanding that we are bringing it into this systems-wide approach. So, RCFs really are housing with supports, and we have a study ongoing, which we'll be presenting shortly in terms of how can we ensure those that need the supports are getting the right supports in the right residential setting, and that's part of that review. We've got a working group that is coming together to find that. There are also going to be some health discussions, health interventions as we go through that process, but we will be bringing that back in terms of how that fits in, how we can ensure that the system itself is using those housing with supports in the best way possible. There are vacant beds, there are opportunities for that. We've got to make sure that we lend the support to the operators so that they can provide the support necessary to ensure that those tenants and those residents are receiving that.
Thank you for that. How many RCF for-profit and non-profit do we have? Can you remind us again?
Yes, through the chair to the council, we have just over 800 subsidized beds.
Oh, okay.
And then it's almost a doubling of that in terms of available beds throughout the system, which we don't subsidize.
Right. Thank you for that. I'll take the chair back, and Councillor Whitehead for the second time.
Thank you. And you opened up exactly where I was going. So Edward, my understanding is 25% vacancy rate currently in the RCF. Is that correct?
Through the chair to the council. So in terms of both the subsidized and unsubsidized beds available, I believe it's 25%. I'd have to confirm that. I know from our perspective, the ones that we fund, there is all the beds are filled in terms of those subsidies.
On the subsidy side, but they still have vacancies.
Yeah.
Through the chair to the council, correct.
And it's also my understanding that we didn't have any outbreaks in our RCFs. Is that correct?
Through the chair to the council, that's correct.
So they did a good job with a very high risk population within their residences. I highlight that. So, I think it needs to be highlighted because they are a true partner. And like you said, it's over 800 plus that they're providing service for. So I guess when you talk about matching services with people and so forth, tomorrow if the RCF said, you know what, clearly the city isn't welcoming to for-profit approaches, we're closing our doors or giving the city a month's notice. Could we house that over 800 plus people?
Through the chair to the councillor, I mean, 800 people at one point obviously will be an incredible challenge, and absolutely we understand the support that is provided through those beds.
Yeah, I just want to paint that reality. Right now, they're providing a service for 800. Yes, we've had some highlight stories of poor operators, and I know the organization wants to see all the bad operators out too. So there's no issue about let's purge the bad operators. But I know that Jillian and I and Joanne Priel, and we walked through a lot of them, and we talked to the residents, and they were very happy. We talked to social workers, very happy with the service. They felt like family, and there's some even exceed expectations. So as much as people want to put paint a picture, the reality is they are performing a valuable service in our community. So the question I have is, there's this perception, and the perception is a civil liberties issue. And I want to make sure we understand that. So they're free to live there, and they're free to go out in general public. Is that correct?
Through the chair, so absolutely correct. Yes, this is not a institution in that sense.
An institution. So if they choose to, unfortunately, in some cases, a panhandle, so they can buy their cigarettes, there's not a lot that a residential care facility could do in that context, is there?
Through the chair to the council. So these would be typical resident discussions that would happen between the operator and those within it. You know, we do encourage active discussions and education through all means as possible to ensure any impacts that may be happening outside the property are dealt with. But these are autonomous individuals paying rent, so that would be the relationship.
I just want to make it clear, because there's a perception relationship, and there's like that civil libertarian approach is that they're a tenant first, and they have every right that everyone else has. So if they step outside that property and they choose to do whatever, that's out of control of the residential care operator. And far too often we blend those two issues together. I just wanted to provide some opportunity to understand that. I thank Nan for introducing at the tail end of her conversation, Narinder, the whole issue about the evictions and waiving the exemption, and I have real concerns about that. I know my daughter was never called back to work yet because she works in an industry that are not even close to 100%. And my daughter has a place to live, many others don't. And I hate to think that that they're being evicted, and I will be bringing a motion in conjunction with Narinder, probably at council, and hopefully we get other jurisdictions to jump on board. I know I've already talked to you, Edward, and you're helping pull that resolution together. And I just want to make sure that you, whatever you give me, you share with the NAN as well in regards to how we pull that resolution forward.
Through the chair to the council, I'm more than happy to help with that resolution. And you know, we certainly have identified this. We are looking at some of those new funding envelopes that we've received and exploring what flexible means we can have to support those. Because you're absolutely correct. I think the resumption of evictions is going to have an impact, and that is hopefully something that we can deal with some of those new funds.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great discussions. Okay, no more speakers. So we will require electronic vote to approve the recommendation in this report. Please indicate your vote now. I'll come up. Should I have carried? Oh, Councillor Whitehead? and it's carried. Okay, may I have a motion, a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation? Councillor Nan, Councillor Whitehead, and please indicate your vote. And Councillor Jackson, thumbs up? Yep, he's good. Okay. Councillor Nan, would you like to present your motion at this time?
Thank you. Are we doing that before discussion items?
Well, it's related all to the items.
Okay,
we'll be
I'm
talking about.
happy to, however the chair would like to
Yes.
prioritize, I'm happy to do so. Just one quick second as I pull up the motion. If you bear with me for a quick second. Thank you.
Okay.
So it is moved by
Did
myself.
you want to, excuse me, Councillor, would
Yes.
you like to have it shared on the screen for all the other councillors?
That would be ideal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Clerk? Okay, it's right there now.
Thank you. And we'll also, this is a notice of motion, so we'll also need a motion to waive the rules. I will be seeking to waive the rules today in order to get this motion before the committee.
Actually, the clerk is just advising me that we do not need to do that.
Oh, even better. Fantastic.
Okay, thank you.
So moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Pauls that whereas there are 6,231 households on the access to housing social housing wait list, and whereas over the last 5 years residential rents in Hamilton have increased 28%, while the minimum wage has not kept up, making housing increasingly unaffordable for low-income citizens. And whereas the local demand for affordable rental housing has grown at a faster pace than supply, and whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted and exacerbated the inefficiency of congregated living situations for most people, and whereas the development of affordable housing is a strong economic stimulus tool and can leverage federal, provincial, private sector investment in Hamilton while meeting the needs of Hamilton's most vulnerable residents, whereas Hamilton's nonprofit affordable housing developers have formed a coalition referred to as the Hamilton is Home Coalition, with the goal of collectively developing 3,000 new affordable rental units in 3 years, whereas the federal government's initial response to the Hamilton is Home Coalition concept was to invite the coalition to apply to the Canada Mortgage. My apologies. The screen sharing feature is still on through the clerks, and I was reading off of the screen instead of my print copy. So whereas the federal government's initial response to the Hamilton is Home Coalition concept was to invite the coalition to apply to the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation Co-Investment Fund for financing and funding, and whereas since May 2018, most upper government funding for affordable housing development is being directly administered through CMHC with no administration funds provided to the city to fund staff resources to support affordable housing development projects, and whereas Council has endorsed the development of affordable housing as a top priority for the City of Hamilton, therefore be it resolved that the City of Hamilton join the Hamilton is Home Coalition as an active participating member. B, that Housing Services Division staff be directed to participate in and liaise with the Hamilton is Home Coalition. C, that Housing Services Division staff be directed to report back to the Emergency and Community Services Committee on the level of commitment and support expected of staff and other resources required by the division to support the Hamilton is Home Coalition, facilitate the city's participation in and support for the Hamilton is Home Coalition's proposals and projects, and to adequately support expected affordable housing development proposals through 2021. D, that the real estate division be directed to conduct an updated analysis of the city land holdings and potential land purchases from government agencies regarding their potential for affordable housing development and report back to the Affordable Housing Site Selection Subcommittee with recommendations for appropriate sites to dedicate to affordable housing. And E, that the mayor be directed to send a letter to Honorable Ahmed Hussain, the Honorable Philomena Tassi, and the President and Chief Executive Officer, CMHC, Evan Siddle, informing them of Council's commitment to and prioritization of affordable housing development and expressing the City of Hamilton's support in principle for the Hamilton is Home Coalition and its forthcoming funding proposal. So the motion is moved by myself and seconded by our chair, Councillor Pauls. And in terms of speaking to it, I think we've covered quite extensively through the delegation's Q&A, the necessity and the need and the nimbleness to respond to both CMHC's approach of needing to fund viable projects, but most importantly, for us to enact a strategy and be a partner at the table as a municipality to deliver on the housing that is needed in our community. This council has historically done incredible work to support housing in our city. The $50 million Poverty Reduction Fund being one example, the ongoing support that this council has provided, not only through City Housing Hamilton, but also with the mix in terms of delivering affordable housing and mixed income housing projects throughout the city. It's imperative for us as a municipality to focus on delivering. The COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated our housing scenario in the city, layering yet another crisis on top of another crisis, and the time is now for us to act nimbly and for us to take action collectively. So I am proud to move this motion. I think 3,000 in 3 years is the type of bold strategy that we need in this municipality. I believe it's a target that all of us can get behind. And when we do, we will be able to celebrate the victories of the strategy. So moved by myself and seconded by yourself. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nan. Okay, so we're going to vote on this motion. Oh, Councillor Whitehead, sorry. Didn't see that. Councillor Whitehead.
Yeah, and I guess maybe I just having trouble with the wording. Certainly the intent I'm fully support. But the concern I have is in no way, this should be a feasibility in the context of what we would need to provide in resources, because I think we also need a clear understanding what would it impact. And then we make an informed decision. So for example, I had talked about, we only do 2,000 units a year max for a number of years. Now you're throwing in what I heard was 50% more. I don't know what the impacts are on other programs. So this really doesn't capture, it does say come back, but it is also an endorsement. So I'm trying to understand how I can walk that thread to ensure that we have all it is a feasibility and we are bringing the information back and staff will provide options in regards to funding. So can I get an answer to that?
Councillor Nan, would you like to answer it or staff?
I'd be happy to answer it and with staff to jump in, but I did work with staff in formulating the therefore be it resolved so that I best captured what they responded to us in terms of the ways in which the city can be contributing co-investment in this portfolio, and not to do so in the motion in and of itself, but to hear very clearly a report back from staff about what could that look like. What will it mean? Today, we have to, I think, leave with a very clear endorsement of the Hamilton is Home proposal in order for our staff to be able to begin the work of looking at, so let's dig down into the how and what this means for the city to become an active partner in. So item C in the motion very specifically talks about reporting back to the committee in terms of a definition of the level of commitment and support that would be expected of staff, what other resources would be required, not only from this division, housing services, but city service-wide, and to help identify how to facilitate the city's participation and support of the proposal and the projects that are there. But happy to have staff supplement as well.
Staff, Edward John, would you like to respond to that?
So the question to Edward is, what does this direction mean to him?
And through the chair to the councillor, and I think Councillor Nan said it really articulately, that we will return with all those questions asked. I think this is very much a supporting principle to the coalition, to this idea of going forward on a portfolio approach. It makes a lot of sense. It saves a lot of time. From our position, you know, we do need to have that piece of co-investment, and I think that that element in the motion speaks to what we need to bring back as part of that co-investment, what it looks like and what those implications are, both from a housing services perspective, but also some of the other departments that would be involved in, you know, the process of getting these units online.
Yeah, and the reason I'm asking this question is because I know this council has been entrapped in these kinds of wording and before, and you know, I don't have to go far, LRT, where we agreed on principle and all of a sudden we voted on principle and we presumed approving the overall budget when we didn't even have all the numbers in yet. So I don't want to be caught in a trap. I endorse the principle, but doesn't mean I'm supporting the overall project until I see what the implications are on other programs within the city. So hopefully we'll provide those options and what the impacts are.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. So we are voting on this motion, supporting principle Hamilton is Home initiative motion. Okay, so we're all clear? Okay, we're going to vote. Councillor Whitehead, did you vote? I can't hear you.
It hasn't come up yet.
Okay. Thumbs up. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I just ask staff to ensure in their report back that they comment on the process for endorsing individual applications? It's not something that's specific in the motion. We talk about process and implementation in a number of areas, but I expect that the CHMC is going to be expecting some form of endorsement from the municipality. So what would be the parameters for us to agree to endorse individual applications?
So, Edward John, do you want to respond to that? Do we need to change the motion or add or?
No, I'm not asking to change the motion at all. The motion can stand. I'm just asking staff to be prepared to address that in their report when it comes back.
Through the chair to the council, absolutely, we can do that.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Direction.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And that passes. Okay, we're going to go to discussion items. And may I please have a mover and a seconder to put the report on the floor? And that is the Hamilton Arena Partners operating agreement renewal. Councillor Jackson and Councillor Nan. Okay. Is there any discussion on this item? Yes, Councillor Jackson, it's in your ward.
Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Clear.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Madam Chair, thank you very much. I just wanted to share a quick story of 17 years ago, Madam Chair, in strongly supporting this last 5-year renewal with Hamilton Arena Partners, which has been a model private-public partnership in the recreational world in our city of Hamilton, operating the Mohawk 4-Ice Center. Most people would dub it and know it as by its nickname, the Quad Pad Arena, over along Mountain Brow Boulevard in Mohawk Sports Park. 17 years ago, when I was on council, just shortly after amalgamation, council of the day took an enormous chance on this triple P, because to my knowledge, in the world of recreation, City of Hamilton, pre-amalgamation, and since, and through regional governments, had never embarked upon this journey. I was really pleased a strong majority of council, I remember it wasn't unanimous because there were 2 or 3 members of council then that had some concerns, but a strong majority of council supported this Hamilton Arena partnership with the city. City debentured $15 million to construct the Quad Pad Arena with the stipulation and condition that it would provide prime time ice use primarily for those stakeholders and ice users in the community, like girls hockey, old timers hockey, tournament hockey. That's simply because we only had 18 ice pads at the time, all owned by the city, all subsidized. And the arena study back then said, Madam Chair, we needed 4 more pads in our city to accommodate the growth in ice hockey then. But the city couldn't afford it itself. So the stipulation was that Hamilton Arena Partners could charge whatever they wanted to, market rent, going rent for ice time hour use, which was usually double the subsidy amount that the city of Hamilton charged, so that ice pads and arenas across the city would be affordable to everyday families, those on low income, whatever, in the recreational house leagues. But for those leagues that were more competitive, they decided that as long as Hamilton Arena Partners over the life of the contract could repay the $15 million debenture, but would be allowed to charge whatever hourly rate the private sector and those other groups would support and pay because they wanted quality primetime ice. It has been a marvelous success story. And if we approve this last 5-year extension of the current legal agreement today, Madam Chair, it will all be paid off. There's something like $3 or $4 million left. COVID has put obviously a dent in it the last 6 months, but it will be all paid off by the expiry of this agreement. I want to thank, it was originally New Stadia, now Hamilton Arena Partners, the principal players, Ben Spruill and Eddie Paveo, for the outstanding model that the Quad Pad Arena private-public partnership has been. And I know some of my colleagues with other facilities over the years, in order to get much needed either rec centers or arenas, have often spoken to the model at the Quad Pad Arena as well. So, Madam Chair, I'm very supportive. And by the way, when Hamilton Arena Partners, the current agreement was such that not only the repayment over time, so at the end of the day, it wouldn't cost taxpayers anything, but we as the city, the public owns the land at Mohawk Sports Park. We own the arena as well. So it truly has been a tremendous, successful management agreement with Hamilton Arena Partners. My only caveat, Madam Chair, is that I would have loved to have seen a longer extension of this agreement because Hamilton Arena Partners would love to stay here. My understanding in chatting with the proponents prior to today's meeting, they want a presence in Hamilton for many more years, hopefully, to come. And my only question to staff, either General Manager Johnson or Director Hurstek, my understanding is our legal department provided commentary that this agreement should expire before embarking on a new one, even though my preference would have been that we could have provided a 10-year extension beyond this current 5-year, but that legal weighed in, even though the Recreation Department, alluding to and confirming the tremendous work and relationship we've had with Hamilton Arena Partners, ideally within the department, would have allowed to extend it further. So thank you for allowing me to tell that long story through you, Madam Chair, to either General Manager Johnson or Director Hurstek to confirm. But if we support this today, which I hope committee does, I hope the messaging going forward, whoever's on council 4 or 5 years from now, will not forget of this first in Hamilton private-public partnership in the arena recreational division. Thank you, Madam Chair. Now through you to Paul or Chris for a confirming comment.
I think it's Chris is on.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. That is correct, Councillor. Legal provided advice for not extending past the last extension of this agreement. Prior to 2024, when the agreement expires, staff will be bringing back a report with options for the committee to either enter into a new agreement with Hamilton Arena Partners, put an RFP out, and or another option for the city could operate the arenas as well. But we'll be bringing a report back before 2024.
Chris, thank you, Madam Chair. Chris, would you confirm for the committee as well that this has been a very, very successful, outstanding partnership over these 17 years, because I'd rather the committee also hear from you and not just from the ward councillor. Madam Chair, through you, please.
Through you, Madam Chair, absolutely. From staff's perspective, it's been a wonderful partnership, providing ice all year round for Hamilton residents. The city of Hamilton closes our arenas down to allow the ice to be used up there at the quad pad. But from a city staff perspective, it's been an ideal partnership.
Thank you, Chris. And Madam Chair, lastly, KPMG, in audited statements that are provided as part of the report, have said that they have had sufficient appropriate information to provide their assessment that the statements presented are fair and accurate, and that there's no adverse opinion, which is always important from an accounting standpoint. Madam Chair, I'm proud to move it. Thanks for your indulgence, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And actually, Councillor Jackson, I want to thank you for the history you always give on these items, because as a new councillor, I did not know the history. So thank you, and I appreciate that. And it is great that it's such a success story. It's amazing. And as a mother of 4 boys who played hockey, they use it all the time. So thank you. Thank you again. Okay, we have Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you. And I want to thank Councillor Jackson for his championing this particular issue and helping us recognize that private and public partnerships can work and can work very well. And in fact, remind my good friend in Ward 6 that the Commonwealth, in the context of strategic spending and private sector spending and meeting our capital requirement needs in regards to growth in our community and facilities, could replicate that same model. Thank you.
Thank you. Great point. Okay, so let's move on. So we will need an electronic vote to approve the recommendation in this report. Please indicate your vote now. Okay, and it's approved. 2, Stony Creek Arena, outstanding business. It's Ward 5. May I please have a mover and a seconder to put the report on the floor? Councillor Whitehead and Councillor Clark. Is there any discussion in this item? Councillor Whitehead? No?
No.
Oh, you put Tamara. Okay, your name was up still, so she assumed you wanted to say something. Okay, let's continue. 9, okay, we will require electronic vote to receive the report. Please indicate your vote now. Okay, and it's approved. 9.3, 2020 arena opening plan. May I please have a mover and a seconder to put the report on the floor? Councillor Whitehead and Councillor Jackson. Is there any discussion on this item? Yes, Councillor Jackson?
Yes, Madam Chair. Obviously, this is an information report from Manager Steve Savor of Recreation and Director Chris Hurstek. I think it's important for public consumption, Madam Chair. Typically at this time, all of our other 18 pads that the city owns, along with the quad pad, under normal circumstances would be gearing up for the thousands of kids that love playing hockey. Obviously, COVID has put a massive dent and has created things to go awry in terms of the normal scheduling and reopening of the arenas. So maybe for public consumption, Director Hurstek could just let the committee and those viewing in know exactly what stages the arena openings are at, and exactly when they are going to be open with social distancing, masks, etc. Exactly how families for free skates, whatever the case might be, possible tournament, organized play, league play, exactly how things are going to unfold, please. Madam Chair, through you.
Okay.
Through you, Madam Chair. Excellent question, Councillor Jackson. This arena season is going to look quite different than the past arena seasons. Currently, right now, until September 1st, in the hockey world, it's considered last season. So there is some hockey teams practicing at the quad pad. Under normal circumstances, we'd be opening up the twin pads mid-August for the travel teams to practice and do tryouts. And this season, that is what our recommendation is to open up the twin pads along with Rosedale for those early ice users, the travel teams, knowing there probably is not going to be a lot of travel games. There's an opportunity to modify hockey, but we do have figure skating and speed skating. So those early groups that will have ice. The new from Ontario Hockey Federation is that registration is to take place this year from September 1st to October 31st. So a lot of the hockey groups don't have what the registration numbers are as of yet. So we will have these arenas open, and then once we get the demand for the registration for our hockey groups in the future, we'll be opening up additional single pads to meet that demand.
Thank you, Chris. And further to that, subsequent, Chris, when they are open, how about explaining to the community the extra sanitization efforts that you and staff will be applying throughout the arenas, washrooms, handrails, whatever the case might be. I think, again, that's important to our residents. Through you, Madam Chair, Pauls, please.
Chris?
Through you, Madam Chair, absolutely. Social distancing is going to be very, very important with the province increasing the indoor guidelines to allow 50 people per recreation asset. That will mean that we will be allowed to have in between 20 and 25 participants on the ice, as well as one mother, father, guardian also to bring them in. But we will definitely social distance them. There'll be an area for one group to change, to get ready to go on the ice. And then when their rental is over, we will have a half an hour buffer between them so that they can exit the building. We can do cleaning in between, and then the next group will come in a half an hour later.
Chris, I know you, and I think 99% of our citizens yearn for the days when we can have some greater form of normalcy, especially people are just itching to use these wonderful assets, Madam Chair Pauls, of the recreation and arena facilities, but again, to do it safely and carefully. I'm satisfied with the explanation. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And we have Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one question in terms of protocols. So when a parent is taking a child, whether or not it's for figure skating, hockey, or some other type of skating, and they drop them at the door, are we permitting a parent to go in to the arena with that child to watch and monitor their child? So I know we have hockey games that will be occurring. Will a parent be allowed to attend a hockey game to monitor their child? Same thing with figure skating, et cetera, et cetera. Are we contemplating that type of process?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, we are, Councillor. We are working out the kind of logistics of how we're going to be offering that, but in essence, so that we can perform contract tracing just in case it's required. Really, the coach will be the kind of the captain of the 1 hour ice. He'll have a list of the participants or the team members on the list, as well as we're anticipating the name of the parent with that child dropping him off. And then once the parent or the children are kind of in the changing area, the parents will be allowed to go into the viewing area, and we'll have an area where social distancing will be able to take place. And that'll be a total of 50 people per location per hour.
And the 50 people per location per hour is based on the provincial order or our bylaw?
We're going to go with the provincial order. So per asset, so that'll be 50 people per per arena. Even in a double pad, that will be 50 and 50.
Okay, understand. Thank you. It's very helpful because I know a lot of parents were concerned they didn't want to just drop the child off at the door and not be able to go inside. I understand their concerns. I wouldn't want to do that either. So I'd want to watch my child play. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Nan, can you take the chair, please? I'd like to ask a couple of questions because some of my constituent has called me and I already know the answer because I already had a long conversation with you, Chris. But I want the public to know and people that have, their children into hockey and they're looking forward for the health of their children going back into sports. What protocol do you have to facilitate all the time requirement? There's an influx of registration because on your report it says that the arena may not need ice time for the season for 2020 and 2021. So what do we say if there's a lot more registration, because I already sent you some that are starting to register now? What's our response to them?
Through you, Madam Chair, yeah, with the report, we just wanted to indicate that we're really following our normal, offering some early ice for those groups that really want to get on the ice. This time between September 1st and October 31st, it's the hockey associations taking registration. And my staff have been working with the hockey user groups and the associations to find out what their demand and what their ice needs are. And it is a little bit difficult because we don't understand, you mean, what is going to be allowed to be played? You mean the games are going to be modified? This really is about player development and practicing. And really, obviously, the health of the participants is number one. So once we get that demand, we'll open up additional arenas. We will open up more arenas when the demands come in, but we're already hearing that some groups might not be offering programs. They might delay the programs until November, December when they get more information from their provincial body, which would be the Ontario Hockey Federation. And we're also hearing anecdotally that the senior, junior B, and junior C hockey clubs might not be operating this year. So we really don't know what the true ice needs are going to be for this year. We anticipate in October we will, and once we get those ice demands and the amount of hours that the groups need, we'll open up additional pads to meet that need.
And the opening of these ice rinks are quickly done, right? Well, you told me a couple of weeks to get them running if you have an influx?
Yes, we usually take about 2 weeks to put the ice in. We can do it a little bit quicker, 7 to 10 days if necessary, but that's what we do during the hot weather. It takes us about 14 days to put in ice.
That's good to know. And the last question is, I know people say, why wasn't Lawfield open or why wasn't another rink open? How did you choose the 4 or the 5 arenas that are now open?
We chose the twin pads just because of the size of the facilities. Gives the participants and spectators a greater area to social distance. When we did put the plan together, the provincial order was 25 people inside. So we were trying to figure out how we could social distance them. Now with the provincial order going to 50 per asset, it helps us out as well as that at our twin pad arenas, just for a staffing efficiency as well, is that we would have 2 pads at one site. So a little bit more economical for us as well.
Thank you, Chris. It's nice to know that if we do get an influx, we will be opening and making sure our teams are well served. So thank you for that. All right, so we're going to need a vote on this. 9.3, electronic vote, please. And it's carried. 9.4. At this time, I would like to call upon Grace Bader to introduce this item. May I please have a mover and a seconder to put the report on the floor? Councillor Councillor Nan and Councillor Whitehead.
So through the chair, I'm clearly not Grace Mader, but
Oh.
Grace and I talked, and we agreed to rather have both of us talk. I just share a couple of quick things and actually turn things over to the person who's going to introduce this report more fully. This report really is some of the evolution that's happening within our organization about how we deal with our relationships with Indigenous persons. And I'm really pleased that we have guests with us from a staff perspective at this committee meeting from both Public Works. Cynthia Graham is here, Planning and Economic Development on the Heritage side. Alyssa Golden's here as well. And I believe we have some legal representatives as well here. And they're here because they've worked together on something that's incredibly important, how we work in partnership with Indigenous communities and Indigenous organizations on many projects that happen through the city, but also how we're taking a little bit of a different look at it, given the fact that we now have a very well-structured Indigenous office within our city. So I just wanted to thank the corporate approach to this. I'm going to ask Shelley Hill, who is of course the lead for us on our Indigenous strategy, has lots of experience in working in some of these things in her past in British Columbia, and she's going to introduce the report to you just a little bit, and then, as I say, we've got a team of folks here if there are any questions, but we're really excited about not only the work coming forward, but the other side is how we're working behind the scenes together as an organization as well. So over to you, Shelley.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Everyone hear me okay? Awesome. Sego, Shelley Hill, Niguaso, Oswego, Gokanyo. So I just want to take the time to say thank you and appreciate the opportunity to present the Indigenous Archaeology Monitoring Policy and the recommendations, which displays the collaborative work between the Urban Indigenous Strategy, City of Hamilton's Working Group, which I would like to also acknowledge and give thanks to Alyssa Golden and Cynthia Graham, as well as Anders Knudsen, who helped with legal. This report is the first step in acknowledging the need to proactively build municipal Indigenous relationships, especially when it comes to stewardship of the land. The actions presented are steps towards meaningful relationship building, which aligns with the action of the council-endorsed Urban Indigenous Strategy and the work we do in response to the Truth and Reconciliation's calls to action. The purpose is to standardize an interim process in providing consistency, clarity, and direction to city staff, engaging with Indigenous communities on city initiative archaeology work, and coordinating findings of Indigenous monitoring until further development on relationship agreements are developed with each Indigenous communities adopted by the respective council, of course. So we're looking to have the Indigenous Archaeology Monitoring Policy as, again, like I said, an interim approach, and as a starting point, improving engagement with the Indigenous communities, and to further investigate opportunities as well on engaging with natural heritage assessments, which is defined further in the report. Thank you, and let me know if you have any further questions.
Thank you. Is there any questions? Okay, I see none. And we will require electronic vote to approve the recommendation in this report. Please indicate your vote now. Okay. Okay, general information business, item 12. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the amendment to the outstanding business list? Councillor Clark and Councillor Jackson. Thank you. Is there any question on this item? I see none. Electronic vote, please. And the motion is carried. Any other items of the general information or other business? I see none. Okay, we're going to go private and confidential. Item 13, 13.1. Members of the committee, do you wish to move into closed session to discuss item 13.1? No? May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the closed session minutes, July 13, 2020, as presented?